back at the Ministry of Community Development to discuss with other ministries within the government machinery and say how, and see how best we can utilize the recommendation of your speech. Thank you very much for that. Yeah, and again, this action plan has intensified voice against the harmful cultural biases against women. As stated in the GBV assessment report, several legislative initiatives have also sought to fight against the GBV and the VAC. Because of time, I wouldn't prefer to mention all these legislative. I'm aware you know them, and they are also included in the document we are going to officiate today. Dear participants, the United Republic of Tanzania is making an effort in ending violence against women and children. However, there are still challenges facing our dear women. It is the fact that agriculture remains the backbone of the economy, employing most of the workforce. The productivity of a female agriculture worker is 20 to 30% less than that of their male counterparts. Moreover, remarkable disparities in wage earning between men and women still persist. Likewise, even though the government has introduced several pieces of legislation and a national plan of actions to address GBV, the Tanzania GBV assessment, as you said, Dr. Mara detailed that 40% of all women have experienced physical violence. This is terribly high. In addition, the report also highlights several issues which include vulnerability of women across several dimensions, like women continue to have less access to land and home ownership than men, and the men are happy. Men, are you here? Do you hear me or I add a voice? Thank you very much. Fewer women than men enrolled in upper secondary education. Again, please hear me about this. Women wage workers continue to make less than their male counterparts, and the women farmers have less access to the key agricultural products and the productive labor than men, which results in generating lower yields. In addition, limited access to funding resources for implementation of GBV systems in strengthening systems of data collection and harmonization, as well as deficit in the availability of social workers to offer GBV treatment and of lawyers available to offer legal services to victims. All these issues are surrounding women, our girls, our daughter. Dear participants, considering the existing challenges, the government intends to redouble its efforts to achieve the vision of gender equality laid out in a TDV 2025. Our commitment for strengthening efforts against gender-based violence and the violence against children are included as indicators in the 35-year plan, with the focus to broaden gender mainstreaming strategies across numerous dimensions, including a call for adopting measures that address gender inequalities against women and against discrimination in matters of land ownership and inheritance, violence against women, and the intensified voice on culture biases against women. So, in order to achieve all these ambitious strategies, we still bank on your support, all partners, not only the World Bank, and all others who are working together with our government. Only through joint efforts we can be able to see new future comes the 2025 as we have documented in our policies. Dear participants, the government also welcomes further exploration into some of the recommendations included in the reports, such as inputs on how to best enforce existing laws. My friend Dr. Mara, you recommended it very well. I request you to continue working with us so that we go through the policy reviews and find a place where we can fix all these recommendations. Only from existence of good revised policies we can be able the formulation of laws. And this is impossible if we work together all the time, as we have been doing. Again, we call upon all partners to support us in investigation of additional legislative options to end child marriage, expand affordable child care services, guarantee that women have increased access to house and land tenure, security, and ensuring that female agricultural workers have access to the same productive labor and inputs available. Additional areas of exploration included in the Tanzania GBV assessment reports include supporting efforts to better cascade Tanzania National Plan of Action to regional levels. This is very important. Looking into strategies to support sustainable funding of the national plans of action. Investing in improvement to GBV information management systems and offering widespread community outreach and sensitization on GBV and VAC. Dear participants, I'll be given enough time. I will be able to speak again and again, give many examples on what is happening in the community. Let it be enough to thank President Samia Suluhu Hassan for seeing the need of establishing this new Ministry of Community Development, Gender, Women, and Special Groups. I believe the event today is going to find a new voice, a new energy to support this ministry so that all recommendations you are going to give today are worked well with my team. You will be with my Deputy Permanent Secretary, Advocate Mpanju. Asante sana. I request, if possible, in collaboration with the World Bank, we immediately formulate a task force so that after the closure of this meeting, they plan to work together to review this recommendation to capacitate my ministry and specifically myself as a minister to move forward, to engage all other ministries, all other ministers, and see how possible these recommendations coming from your conference today will help the government to refocus its journey towards 2025.
Are you able to see?
We are all observing this journey and expecting to see new future of Tanzania. I believe nothing is impossible because we have data, we have facts, and then we have wishes. Together, we can achieve what we intend by 2025. With these few remarks, I thank you very much. Asanteni sana. Mungu awabariki. Let the work continue. Jamhuri ya Muungano wa Tanzania. Kwaheri.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister Dr. Dorothy Gwajima, for those words. But also, I think for many of us, is the affirmation of the political will that the government has in terms of really having gender equality integration in most of their development programs, but also in terms of achieving the Tanzania Development Vision 2025. Allow me to remind you that this event is being live streamed on YouTube, so please feel free to visit the World Bank Tanzania Twitter page and please share the link as well as live tweet. I've been told that there's no specific hashtag for today, but I suppose gender could also work, or gender report. But also, we are going to have a presentation from Ms. Ya Opong, and upon that, I will start calling the panelists. But before that, I want to invite you to look at the screens for a poem that was specially prepared for this particular event.
Hello and good morning wherever you are. My name is Olivia Nyachiro Kasese, and today I'll be reading for you 2 pieces of poetry. Thank you so much for attending this event. The first piece is called I Lost My Teeth in a Fight. My father tries to kill me twice before the age of 12. Both time go heaven for children whose mothers stand by and watch them die because maybe they deserved it. I tell my girlfriend of how my father has dreams of killing me. She tells me when she was 10, her father stuck his hands down her clothes during afternoon naps and held onto her privates. I cry on her carpet. She says, if men could rape us and get away with it, they would. Every single one.
Yeah, I think itakuwa ni first quarter kwa sababu nani yao ilianza nafikiri mwezi wa 10.
A man touches my name as I introduce myself. My father destroyed the fight in me when I was a child. I think that boy only raped me because I lost my teeth in a fight. I think too much of the past. I think maybe if I had the courage to leave this body, my teeth would grow back. The next piece is called Returning to Sender. My mother arrives in 2 days and there's nothing I can do to stop her, to hide, to avoid her eyes for seeing us for what we have become. We're dying and I do not mind. Mother, I know you'll be horrified at what you will find, at what I have become. I know you will want to tear your eyes from their sockets and stuff them down my throat until you get an answer. I am sorry that I lied. I lie to everyone now. That is what we have become. Liars, beings that lie to the ones they love. We lie because I do not know how to tell you that this body will not work. It will not let me put anything in it that will nourish you, that will add life to it. It fights me. I want to blame this illness, blame the others, the beings, but I'm not sure that I am without guilt. I find comfort in them. I trust them. They tell me it is safer if the people we love do not know. We kept this part, this dying piece, a secret. Those that love me too much to understand, too much to permit this self-harming erosion of the flesh. I am lying when I tell you that I do not enjoy this crumbling, this weakening, this wasting away. I am lying when I tell you I know something is wrong and I am fixing it. I am not fixing it. We're pretending to fix it. We're finding comfort in the inevitability of our mortality. Comfort in the fact that with as little effort as possible, an easy ignoring of the flesh could easily return us back to center.
Yeah, hii ilikuwa na 15 months nakumbuka.
Wow, those were very
Nakwambia hii ilikuwa na miezi 15, sio?
Thank you very much for that.
Nakwambia
Now,
hii si
I
ndio
would like to
ilikuwa
also remind you that we do have coffee and refreshments outside
interview ya miezi 15.
for the month of Ramadan and Lent. So please feel free to stand up and stretch your legs every once in a while because we do have a couple of 2 hours until we finish the session. I would now, before I bring Ya to the stage, I would now like to call on the panelists to come and join us here on the stage. So first I would like to start with the Deputy Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Community Development, Gender, Women and Special Groups, Advocate Amon Mpanju. Please welcome on stage. I would also like to call on Helen Carlson Rex, the World Bank Practice Manager for Social Sustainability and Inclusion. Welcome. I would also like to call on Godfrey Bonaventura, the Head of Programs from Haki Elimu. And last but not least, Dr. Gladness Kire, Principal Education Specialist and Gender Focal Person for the Ministry of Education, Science and Technology. And as a preliminary to this panel discussion, I'm going to now call on the sector leader, Sustainable Development from World Bank, Ms. Yao Opong, to do a presentation on the gender assessment needs.
Tukimuuliza this for only for quarter 1, sio?
see that there's limited or poor quality access to family planning and reproductive and maternal health care. We see that there are gender gaps in secondary school enrollment and completion. If we look at economic opportunities, for example, we see that women plot owners produce less than their male counterparts. We see that female wage workers earn less than their male counterparts. We see that there are gender differences in time use, which affects women's economic productivity, as well as intra-household bargaining power. If we look at the pillar on ownership and control of assets, we see that there are gender differences in home and land ownership due to customary practices, and that women experience lower levels of formal finance ownership or account ownership and savings than men, and also have less access to financial services and mobile banking than men. In terms of voice and agency, we see that intimate partner violence remains a serious problem, and that women face restricted intra-household decision-making power and have limited political voice and leadership. And also child marriage remains high. So what I'm going to do now is take each of these 4 pillars and drill down a little bit more into some of the details. If we look at the main findings in terms of human endowments, again, we see that there has been progress. There was a drop and has been a drop in the total fertility rate, as mentioned, from 6.7 in 1990 to 4.8 nationally now in 2019, although it does remain higher than the sub-Saharan African average. If we look at gender parity in enrollment, we see that it has been achieved at the lower secondary level. So again, in certain indices, there has been progress. Nevertheless, there's room for growth. We see that girls are less likely to enroll in upper secondary. In 2021, the Gender Parity Index, the ratio of girls to boys enrolled in school, was at 0.78. According to the 2021 Tanzania Education Sector Report, rural poor girls remain the most disadvantaged and the least likely to enroll in upper secondary education. If we disaggregate a little bit and we look at the findings for mainland and Zanzibar, we see that if we take data from 2015, when the disaggregated data was available, the total fertility rate for mainland at that time was 5.2%. In Zanzibar, at that period in time, it was 5.1. For mainland, 33% of women use family planning. In Zanzibar, 7%. As we've learned earlier, the Gender Parity Index in secondary school stands at 0.78. In Zanzibar, gender parity has been exceeded at 1.01. If we now drill down a little bit more into looking at issues of women's economic opportunities and ownership and control of assets, at the national level, again, we see there has been progress. In 2008, Tanzania was one of the first countries in Africa to launch mobile money services and establish a regulatory framework to increase financial inclusion. And we see that the share of women with a bank account has increased from 14% in 2011 to 42% in 2017. Nevertheless, there's room for growth. We see that 26% of men claim sole ownership of a house compared to 7% of women. And as was mentioned earlier, there's a 20 to 30% gender yield gap between male and female plot owners. Again, if we drill down and disaggregate between mainland and Zanzibar, we see that on mainland, 7% of women own a house alone compared to 26% of men. The figures for Zanzibar are 6% of women own a house alone compared to 31% of men. We see that 66% of women on the mainland do not own land compared to 62% of men, whereas 92% of women in Zanzibar do not own land compared to 85% of men. We also look at mobile phone ownership. 52% of mainland women own a phone compared to 69% of men, whereas the same figure in Zanzibar is 65% of women own a mobile phone compared to 83% of men. If we turn now to the pillar on voice and agency, again, we see there's been progress. Mechanisms are in place to address gender-based violence, including, as was mentioned earlier, the National Plan of Action to End Violence Against Women, 2017-18 to 21-22, in mainland and Zanzibar. And we see that a national child helpline has been established to offering a toll-free service across all mobile networks in on mainland and in Zanzibar. Nevertheless, there's room for growth. 40% of all women aged 15 to 49 years have experienced physical violence. 10% of women nationally have experienced female genital mutilation. Again, if we disaggregate between mainland and Zanzibar, we see that on mainland, 40% of all women 15 to 49 have experienced physical violence. In Zanzibar, that figure stands at 14%. We see that 59% of women believe that their husbands are justified in beating their wives in certain circumstances. The same figure for Zanzibar is 36%. 10% of women on mainland have experienced female genital mutilation, cutting, 0.1% in Zanzibar. The report also delves into the drivers of inequality, understanding the underlying factors that drive this inequality. And if we again look at the pillars, and we look at human endowments, the drivers of high fertility rate and adolescent fertility rate are related to issues of low educational attainment, low reproductive agency, early marriage. If we look at the drivers of gender gaps at the secondary school level, we see that early marriage and childbirth play a factor, as do issues of financial constraints at higher education levels and gender norms that prioritize the education of boys over girls. If we turn to the pillar on voice and agency and unpack a little bit the underlying drivers, we see that high rates of early marriage and childbirth play a role, low levels of economic independence for women, as well as low levels of education overall. And drivers of low agency and decision-making power relate to issues of women's lower participation in employment, age gaps between husband and wives, and being in a polygamous relationship. If we look at the drivers of inequality across the last two thematic pillars, and we look at economic opportunities and ownership and control of assets, here we see that the drivers of these gaps in agricultural productivity, for example, are due to issues such as lower access to male farm labor, lower returns for labor, and non-labor inputs. If we look at entrepreneurs, we see that women's lower spending on wages for workers, and women are less likely than men to register their enterprise. And male-owned businesses are more likely to cope with the impacts of poverty and poverty shocks. If we turn to asset ownership and control, and we look at land, for example, women are less likely to be included on a land title due to customary practices. And if we look at issues relating to financial inclusion, we see that women's lower earnings affect their ability to save. And we see that women's lower access to key sources of collateral, such as land, also play a factor. And lack of financial products specifically targeted at women also plays a role. In the final two slides, I'll turn to some of the policy recommendations that were outlined in the report. And again, the recommendations are framed around these four pillars. If we look at issues of human endowments and voice and agency, we unpacked them into these four areas, looking at low secondary school enrollment and completion. And some of the policy recommendations could relate to offering livelihood and life skills training to support adolescent girls to graduate from upper secondary level and to avoid early childbearing. Longer-term policy strategies could involve using conditional cash transfers, for example, to ease the financial strain of attending secondary school, or unconditional cash transfers to target girls who have dropped out of school. In terms of early marriage and childbearing, if we look at the short term, pushing forward the implementation of the High Court and Court of Appeals ruling to clarify 18 years as the minimum age of marriage, piloting life skills training and safe space programs in schools to encourage girls to stay in school. And if we look in the longer term, we see that supporting economic independence through unconditional cash transfers and vocational training to school dropouts are also policy options. In terms of the higher burden of care, in the short term, policies could focus on promoting gender norm discussion groups, interventions to encourage greater sharing of domestic responsibilities among couples. Longer term strategies could focus on providing childcare services to ease women's financial strains and increase their economic independence. And in terms of physical insecurity, short-term outlook, as was mentioned earlier, engaging men and boys in behavior change interventions on GBV and violence against women and children, and providing training to women in high-risk sectors to address risks of GBV. Longer-term strategies could involve supporting access to legal services and a more accountable justice system. Finally, looking at policy recommendations in the sphere of economic opportunities and access to assets, if we turn to the agricultural sector and look at the lower returns to agricultural inputs, in the short term, policy recommendations could involve capitalizing on digital technology to increase knowledge about cultivation practices, investing in female extension workers to train women farmers on how to increase their agricultural yields. Longer-term strategies could involve supporting financing of price discounts to improve women's use of higher quality pesticides and fertilizers. If we turn to issues of insecure land tenure and lower use and productivity of farm labor, short-term interventions or recommendations on the policy front could include providing women information on their land rights. And longer-term strategies could involve incentivizing households to co-title through conditioning land ownership subsidies, or supporting women's access to mechanization to compensate for their low use of farm labor. If we turn now to lower capital and access to credit, in the short term, supporting programs which offer non-collateral dependent loans. And longer-term strategies could include encouraging use of mobile savings accounts, providing in-kind support, such as through productive assets, input financing, and cash grants. And finally, in terms of lower skill levels and rates of business formalization, short-term policy recommendations could involve providing a behavior nudge and providing behavior training on business and entrepreneurship skills, and using business registration support that offers support in setting up bank accounts and incentivizing women to register their businesses. Longer-term strategies could involve expanding small-scale capital support for local entrepreneurship. These policy recommendations are taken from global evidence. And they're, as has been mentioned, our attempt at sparking a conversation and laying out what the options are for addressing these gaps across these important spheres. I will end by reflecting a little bit on a quotation from our colleagues at UNFPA. In the next session, we'll hear about the gender-based violence assessment and a stakeholder consultation that took place as part of the preparation of these reports. And as part of the conversations, we were reminded of the need to really identify good practice and scale up what is working. We were also reminded of the need to ensure there's proper funding for these policy recommendations, and also the important factor of addressing social norms and addressing harmful practices. And finally, reminded that all of this takes time and investment. I'll end there. Asanteni.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ya Opong, the Sector Leader, Sustainable Development at the World Bank. Right, so we are about to commence our first panel discussion for today, based on the gender findings, the main findings from the Gender Assessment Report. And I'd just like, for just a quick one before we dive into the questions, a 30-second reaction from the main findings. In 30 seconds, I'll start with you, Advocate Mpanju. 30 seconds reaction from the report, what we've just heard.
Thank you so much, Madam Facilitator. Me being from the government, first of all, I join my minister by appreciating the good work done by World Bank, because these findings are giving us the facts and the informations we are going to use to inform our interventions, our initiatives towards gender equality and women empowerment. So they are going to inform our policies, intervention programs, and as you may be aware, we are reviewing the Women and Gender Development Policy of 2002. So to us, we are getting some inputs, not some, most of the input that are going to inform our intervention. So we welcome the findings and the assessments. They are coming at the right time. Thank you.
That is so good to hear, because I know that one of the gaps that were identified in the report was the policy, the 2002 policy. So that's really, really encouraging to hear.
And the legal framework. So we are also being a lawyer.
Okay.
Now from the policy view and the recommendation and the implementation strategy that will be developed will also inform the legal framework. We need really to revise our laws to be able to mainstream gender equality and women empowerment towards achieving meaningful sustainable gender development in our country.
Hello?
Right, brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Advocate Mpanju. Helen, 30 seconds, reaction to the main findings, please.
All right, no, thank you so much, and thanks for inviting me to come here. I want to, 30 seconds is hard because there was a lot said, but I'll try. I want to really congratulate and thank the team. I think the findings are incredibly rich. They're based, as was said, on international evidence. So there's a lot for us to digest and to think about. A lot of work ahead, but I think my main takeaway is really that to translate all these findings, all the evidence, it really takes commitment from the World Bank, and that you heard that from Mara, you heard that from Ya, we are here as a team, but I think also commitment from government, and that we've also heard today. So I think for me, the main takeaway is that we have the findings, we know what to do, but to get there, we need to act on this commitment. And I'm really glad that we are here at this juncture and that we can now move forward with this joint commitment to take this really important agenda forward, important for the women and girls in Tanzania, but also, as was said, for Tanzania's move towards middle-income country. Unless we empower 50% of the population, no country will get there, Tanzania included.
Thank you. Great work on the 30 seconds as well.
Yeah.
Godfrey, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Caro, and also the World Bank for coming with this very nice reports. Actually, my reaction, I was asking myself, if you look at the numbers, especially on the driver of high fertility rate in Tanzania, we are higher than the Sub-Sahara, and we're also higher than the EAC. And then you ask yourself key questions. What is happening in Uganda, Rwanda, Kenya, and not happening in Tanzania? And I leave this question to the stakeholders so we can continue the conversation to ensure what so special can we do to move below. At least we get to be in line with our colleagues, Kenya, Uganda, and Rwanda and Burundi, because it's very shameful for a country like Tanzania to be leading in the high fertility rate, and especially being caused by teenage fertility rates, which has so many adverse effects, as pointed out by the findings. So for me, that is, as a man, that is very, very disturbing moment of today by hearing this kind of findings today.
Thank you for that, Bonaventure. No, but I will agree with you. Teenage pregnancies, fertility rate amongst the teenage girls, that is a very worrisome data to be looking at. Doctor, over to you.
Okay, thank you. I also appreciated the work that has been done by the World Bank. The information which have been found out will help us to improve a lot. And I hope the information that has been given to us will help to improve and improve, especially in the area of teenage marriage and childbearing. Thank you.
Right, thank you for that, Doctor. So I'll dive straight into the questions now, starting with Advocate Mpanju. So we've seen improvement, but despite the positive improvement that we have observed through this report, we still see some key gaps in terms of gender inequality, but also when one wonders about the drivers of these inequalities, they're quite multisectoral, right? So how is your ministry, considering that it has the sole mandate for women and special groups, adopting a multi-sectoral approach that could be adopted, across the agricultural sector, the private sector, education, water, health, etc.?
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Facilitator. It's true that from the findings as it had been presented and what is real on the grounds, we still have that gap.
Okay.
And that's why I can say the government of the United Republic of Tanzania, since its independence, has been taking some initiatives, I'm saying some, towards ensuring that gender equality and the women empowerment, towards removing that gender imbalances. And that can be evidenced through the number of initiatives that have been taken by the government of the United Republic of Tanzania, including signing, ratification, and the domestication of international and regional protocols, agreements, and conventions that aim at bring about that gender equality, fighting gender imbalances. And also we have national policies, laws, strategies, programs that are aiming towards achieving meaningful, inclusive, and sustainable development when it comes to gender equality, at the same time fighting that kind of gender imbalances. And as the government, we have embarked in 4 main priority areas in order to achieve that gender equalities. The first being women economic empowerment, and on this area we have a number of instrument programs. We have the financial inclusive framework number 2 of 2018-2022 that aims at ensuring that women have access to finance. And for instance, on this area, through our Tanzania Commercial Bank, women have been accessing what we can call free interest loans, and more than 5 million USD, equivalent to 11 billion Tanzanian shillings, have been given to women entrepreneurs who are about 2,574 of them have benefited. And yet, through the amendment which was made to the Local Government Authority Financial Act of 2018, which directed district council to set aside 10% of their own resources or internal revenue being provided to women as a free interest loans. And out of that, for the year 2021 up to 2022, more than 28 billion had been given to women groups, who are about 5,000 of them. And now this is the approach we are taking towards empowerment of women. The second strategy is elimination of gender-based violence. Our campaigns, our interventions, by engaging traditional leaders, religious leaders, CSOs, local government authorities, and different stakeholders are aiming at fighting this kind of violence towards women and girls. So as the ministry, we are eager towards achieving that. But also, we have another strategy that is aiming at ensuring women number is increasing in leadership and holding decision-making positions. It is the evidence, as you all know, that through the regime of Excellency Samia Suluhu Hassan, we have evidenced the increasing number of women in leading the most strategic ministries, which also is another lesson and role model to men and to the community, that women can lead the most strategic ministry, apart from having Her Excellency the President, having the Speaker of the National Assembly. Yet you find the Minister of Defense, Land, Earth, they are women. And this now, also, we have not been there, but we are trying. But also in terms of members of parliament, 36% of them are women. Despite of the vehicle that is taking them up to there, that's something debatable, and maybe you'll get some recommendations. So all these strategies, to us, they're aiming towards ensuring gender balance, women empowerment. And yet, in terms of sectoral policies, we have been able to mainstream gender issues in sectoral ministries, like the Ministry of Water. When you look at the National Water Policy of 2002, it calls upon inclusion of women even those bodies that are making decisions, the water bodies, authorities have directed that women must participate. Also, when you look at the land policy of 1995, it calls upon inclusion of women, and said that you can see the village land committee, the district land and housing tribunal, having the inclusion of women in those leadership. Also, when you go to the education and training policy of 2014, it calls upon inclusion of girls. And as a result, we have evidence increased the number of enrollment ratio of girls at pre-primary, primary, and secondary. So in all sectoral ministries, we're ensuring there is proper inclusion of gender issues towards fighting that gender imbalances.
Thank you for that, Advocate. Just a follow-up question on that, and I will reflect also on the Honourable Minister's comment that was raised when she mentioned that there are some people, well, the men, to be specific, are a bit skeptical of all these initiatives and interventions, and where exactly are they living the men? So is the boy child being left behind, one? And two, how is the ministry engaging men in all these interventions to make sure that we're bringing along both genders?
Well, thank you so much. As the ministry mandated to promote women empowerment, but also to bring that kind of equilibrium whereby men and boys will be on top of the agenda in order for really to have really empowerment of women. As you rightly said, we cannot talk of the gender in mainstreaming, women empowerment, without bringing men, boys on top. We need men to take lead. At the same time, also empowering women, because sometimes women are the causative of their segregation. Of course,
are they now?
I can really tell it with evidence. And
this is getting interesting.
Of course, the problem here, you find the problem is the issue of education, awareness. You find the other women are not aware of their rights. So they take, as it was also found in the assessment, there are women that are guarded that kind of violence to them. It is part of the life. And for that, we need also to empower women and them to understand their rights. At the same time, we need to empower men and boys. Now, the government, we are embarking in a number of initiatives to ensure that men also come on top of this, because we need both players, men and women, to be able to achieve that reality. And we have a number of initiative intervention, one being the Women and Gender Development Policy of 2000 and its implementation strategy of 2005, which is now under review. And that's why I say that this assessment have come at the right moment, because they are going to inform what is going on in terms of finalization of the Women Gender Development Policy. Now that Women Gender Development Policy is objectives, requires that all men and women are involved when you talk of development, are involved in fighting these stereotypes, tradition and norms that are alienating women from benefiting on equal footing like men. But also we have a number of campaigns, including what we all know, Twende Pamoja Ukatili Sasa Basi. This campaign aims at creating awareness to both men and women, but also men to be able to see the inequality in the what I call the challenges women and girls are facing in terms of being involved, in terms of the being violated by men. So the gender calls upon both men and women to take their part in terms of ensuring that gender equality and women empowerment. But also we have the he and she approach.
Okay. How does that work? In Tanzania?
Yeah, that is calling upon men also and women to take their roles, because we cannot change the behavior, we cannot change the attitude, we cannot change the roles that promotes masculinity without bringing men on top. So we are aiming and we are striving to ensure that women, they have equal role. They are regarded equal. They see each and everyone having potential contribution towards development of a given family, given society. So we have a number of campaigns, including the strategies, policies I've mentioned, including also putting women as the role model. Because you find you have a defense, a minister, a woman minister, on top of the defense, and under her you find the CDF. Now also all the armies, and she's in charge.
Right, thank you.
From the police point of view. So by doing that, by teaching by examples, we believe we are going to achieve this. But the reality is that we need all stakeholders to come together. We need the private sectors, we need the CSOs, we need development partners, we need all people, religious people, traditional people, at all levels, including also having special intervention. We're having special clubs and desks in schools, primary schools, that are used as a platform to discuss issues of the importance towards achieving gender equality, gender mainstreaming, but also women empowerment. We are trying to inculcate that to the youth, to value and they see the meaning and role of women, girls in their lives. So we are trying to inculcate it from the primary level, but also we're having gender desk in different government institutions with the focal persons, government departments, but also ILN institutions. We are continuing to have those gender desks.
Sorry to cut you off, Deputy Minister.
Gender equality. Thank you so much.
All right. Apologies to cut you off once again, but I'm going to definitely come back to you and ask you again whether or not just having a woman minister in the Defense Ministry is actually enough, but I appreciate the response on that. We'll now go over to Dr. Gladness Kire, who is the gender focal person at the Ministry of Education, Science Sector and Technology. Dr. Kire, we see that gender parity being achieved for the subsectors of primary and lower secondary due to the government's rollout of free basic education is really doing good. So congratulations for that and the ministry's work. But the gap still remains, as we've seen the data that was presented, right? So what do you think can help overturn that, considering that education is possibly one of the main interventions that we should be pushing for gender equality?
Thank you so much. The gap can be reduced or eliminated by strengthening the guidance and counseling units in schools, which will help will help girls to stay in schools without dropping out, maybe due to pregnancies and early marriages. Again, several initiatives have been taken by the government of Tanzania through Ministry of Education by introducing a re-entry program whereby the pupils and students who dropped out by various reasons, including pregnancy, to go back to school. I hope by doing so, the gap will be reduced, because those students, female students who got pregnant and drop out, have chance to go back.
But how do they go back, Dr. Kire? Do they go back into the formal education system, or are we now referring to the alternative education pathways? Do they become tailors? Do they take the academic route? Where are they going?
Both ways.
Okay.
They are free to choose where in which way they can go back.
Okay.
Also, one of the problems or reasons which make some pupils not to go to schools, maybe due to lack of food, lack of feeding program in schools. But now the government have introduced the feeding program whereby parents will contribute somehow to enable the pupils to stay in schools, especially the day scholars.
But what about the sociocultural norms that actually contribute to this thing? So for example, you spoke about teenage pregnancies, right? Does the ministry have any intervention, community interventions, that would possibly, like for example, we saw that there's cash transfers, one of the interventions that is being, that is being used. What else is the ministry doing to make sure that the enrollment as well as the graduation rate stays the same, considering the sociocultural norms that still act as limitation and barriers when it comes to the girl child's education?
Pardon? Can you repeat, please?
It's okay. The sociocultural norms. We understand that there are different limitations and different barriers facing the girl child in terms of, just being enrolled in school and staying in school. You mentioned teenage pregnancies as one of the factors affecting this rate, yes?
Yes.
So my question is, does the ministry have any intervention or approach that it is using to encourage that girls stay in school apart from the cash transfers that we have heard from the main findings?
Yeah.
No.
Maybe I can respond on
Please,
that.
Karibu.
Yes. We are working together with the Ministry of Education and also the Ministry responsible for local government authorities, because when it comes to the issue of gender, we are implementing the cross-cutting issue of which we need every minister, every stakeholder to work with to ensure that policies, laws, interventions are also inclusive. One of the strategies we have come up with for the sixth government regime is coming up with the specific schools for science for girls that are going to be constructed in all regions of mainland Tanzania, but also through the presence of committees, school committees, we are also we are encouraging and putting in place the systems whereby parents get information through the committees, through those meetings, on the importance of ensuring that their girls go to school, attend to school, get education. So we have some strategies, also other strategies that are under my ministry, and the Ministry of Community, sorry, not my ministry, and the Ministry of Community Development. Of course, from that perspective, it is my ministry.
It is your ministry.
We have strategies that ensure, that are aiming at ensuring that children, girls remain in school.
Okay.
The one of which it was also mentioned that the sixth government regime under Samia Suluhu Hassan is to direct even those pregnant women and those young girls, young women to go back to school. So all these are strategies. In the alternative education pathway, like adult education, private, all these are taken by the government to ensure, to ensure that all girls, women go to school and attain education on equal footing like boys and men. And that's why you can see even the increased ratio, as I mentioned, at the pre-primary education and secondary is
level,
1-to-1 ratio. Of course, we are now being beaten. You can find even the nation results, the top 10 are just girls. So these are the indication that there are interventions that are being made by the government through the local government authorities, through the ministry responsible for education and the ministry responsible for local communities to ensure that there is that awareness being created to the community to ensure that girls go to school. Now, that doesn't really do away all the challenges that stem from the social negative attitudes.
Right.
You find we have that attitude, traditions, norms.
And that is exactly my question. How do we circumvent that? The traditions and beliefs and the sociocultural norms that have actually resulted to us being in the position that we are today. That was my initial question.
Yes. Now, the intervention we are doing is awareness raising to the community. we are doing a lot of intervention.
What about the law, Deputy Minister?
What
about policies?
The law and the policies does not accommodate or embrace that kind of attitudes and tradition that aim at discriminating girls from benefiting from the education system. The policies I've mentioned, even the Education Act of 1978, the Education Policy of 2014, they don't entertain, they don't embrace those kind of culture. Rather, they are used as a tools to fight those kind of cultures.
Okay.
So there are a lot of campaign that is going on, but also the directives of our leaders, even at the grassroots level, to ensure and encourage that all boys and girls to go to school, but also through different government leaders at all levels, we are trying to discourage those kind of tradition,
and
norms
customs.
and customs.
Right. Okay. So
But we are still going on with that work because you cannot, for maybe a day, fight those kind of culture. They are inculcated within the traditions of tribes and the clans. So
Yes.
we need to continue together to fight that kind of taboos and traditions.
Okay, thank you for that, Advocate Mpancho, and for offering to come in with that response. Now, I know that Haki Elimu Bonaventure, you have been working a major stakeholder in the education sector. You've also supported the governments with the different ministries when it comes to interventions, both for the boy child and the girl child. So I'm going to bounce off the same question to you. But as you respond to that, I also would like to hear that Haki Elimu recently released a report on sexual and reproductive health. Can you share with us some of your main findings on that, especially in relation to the question that I've just asked? Karibu.
So should I start with this question or are you going to ask?
You can start with the first question and then go over to the findings. I'm hoping that the findings from your report would actually have some answers to that question.
Yeah, thanks, Caro. I think with the first question, which actually the government official tried to respond, is that the government have started doing a number of strategies, the one which has been mentioned, to construct those 20 boarding schools, and is going to spend a huge amount of money. They start in the fiscal year 2021, 2022, to start with 10 schools, which means in the next fiscal year, they're going to allocate more money again to support that. That is a good step. It's a good step in one way. I can give you one example, which actually is in one of our schools, in one of the intervention that we are doing to keep girls in schools and to support their transition. The school is called Itojanda. It's in Tabora. So it used to be a day school, but now it's a boarding school because girls have been enrolled into the boarding school because of the support from Haki Elimu and also the community. You know, girls were walking 15 kilometers in a day. That means return, it is 30 kilometers. In a month where we have 20 schooling days, it is 600 kilometers. Huh? And then in a year, assume they start for 10 months, it is 6,000 kilometers. So it is from Dar es Salaam, I'm giving you the social maths. Dar es Salaam to Bukoba, Dar to Bukoba, Dar to Bukoba, 3 times. So assume what happens on the way from home to the school with the border people who are very expert now to doing the hooking up and all that way. So you can imagine the situation, and this kind of strategy which is being done by the government is going to save so many girls on issues to do with early pregnancies. But another thing which actually is now connected to the issue of awareness, all the norms and everything have to do with provision of platform and dialogues for people upholding all these norms to understand the negativity of their pursuance of their norms to affect girls' education. And which actually I can also connect to some of the interventions that we are doing now to prevent violence and also supporting girls to remain in school. So we have done so many dialogues, we have done so many awareness, so many education to their community, and then we see there are a lot of changes from the community side to leave away their norms and then to support girls because they see others are going, and then at the end of the day they reach university and then others are in Form 5, and then they find themselves, no, I should stop this, and they go to this. So the issue is more on education, to understand exactly what is the implication of A and what is the benefit of B. Coming to your question, yeah, in the last 2 weeks we launched our research reports on sexual and reproductive and health rights, and the findings are very, very interesting. Also encourage you to go to our website and then you download that document and you read, because the report is very big. But general finding is that sexual, reproductive and health rights is not effectively taught in schools. I don't want to go to what are the drivers, but that is the general picture. And what does that mean if it is not taught? And you all know the fundamental aspect of teaching this kind of education to our children. More knowledge is lacking. Delaying techniques, knowledge on choices on relationships, knowledge on knowing the autonomy of their body. This is my body, this is me. Yeah. Why do you force me to go into marriage? Yeah. You see? Knowledge on knowing about their rights, of which in the past we used to have this kind of education, kind of knowledge. You go to a lady, by then we see our brothers, they try to seduce a lady, you are nearby, then you see, let's say, nitakupa jibu baadaye. That is the delaying technique. You go and you start thinking, what is the effect for me to accept? Because you are being taught on the negative effects once you do that relationship at your age. You know exactly what will happen. So by knowing the situation of these research findings, and now you can see the way it's connected to the findings that have been shared here. The issue of high fertility rates to adolescents is connected to the lack of sexual reproductive health rights. Because early pregnancy, early marriage, they are the drivers of the fertility.
But in the event that they do get the education and they're still subjected to the sociocultural norms at home and are still told to get married, what do? How effective is that sexual reproductive health education then?
Carol, the issue is understanding. When someone is aware, when someone has the knowledge, and someone knows her right, will be in a position to negotiate. My mom, my dad, do you know the importance of me to move from 4 to 5? And if I go to university, do you know that I'm going to be employed? Do you know that I'll get better pay? Do you know that I'm going to help you to get more cows? That is the issue they're going to be in a position. You know, the issue is negotiation. We even see this at our homes. My wife is educated. She knows why do I need to support both boys and men. You see, I have 3 boys, I have 1 lady. And sometimes I tell my boy, don't go to the kitchen, remain here. My wife will come, no, let them to go there to learn more. You see? So it's because my wife knows exactly why all should be supported to apply anything that they need to apply in their life, anything that they need to realize as part of their potential in their life. Okay. So the issue here, sexual reproductive health rights, is very vital on the aspect of the 2 aspects, which are the drivers that pointed there, the early pregnancy and the early marriage as well. You can be in a position, as I pointed earlier, that at least to delay, to communicate. Carol, hey, you are an advocate for girls. You see, I see you in the Twitter, so please help me because I'm in jeopardy of 1, 2, 3. This is because of the knowledge. They have been taught on how to communicate. They have been taught on how to learn and understand the implication of something that they should defend themselves. Okay. That is the essence of these young children, young ladies, to be taught on sexual, reproductive, and healthy rights.
Right, so on the same note of reporting, you spoke about reporting. On the same report that you published, we found that violence was happening, but girls and boys were not comfortable to report. Why do you think that is? For both genders, actually. I found that quite interesting.
Yeah, one, I think, is the fear among the children. And this, again, I take you back to the issue of sexual reproductive health and rights. If there are a platform, if our children are taught on all these aspects, on sexual reproductive health rights, on violence, and on GBV, on anything to do with their security or their safety. And if there are platforms within the schools, they'll be in a position to report. But many schools do not have these platforms. I thank the Ministry of Community Development. They are finalizing, I think, the preparation of the Child Protection Guidelines, which has identified all the structures from the high level to the school level. Establishment of Madawati ya Ukatili, the platform for child protection, of which for our case Akilim has done that pilot. And I would wish Mama Gwajima, one day I give you 2 to 3 schools, you go and visit the functionality of those platforms, which could be quite useful in your case as you're supervising the implementation of that child protection guidelines as well. They have been working, children have platforms, the Sauti Yangu boxes, reporting and responses box, and they are being told these are the kind of violence. Once you feel or you sense, then write something and they go and they put that thing there. And then there is a structure on when to open that Sauti Yangu boxes, the reporting responses box, and then all the entries are reviewed. So those which
by the teachers
can be the entries
by the teachers.
No
They're reviewed by
teachers.
the teachers.
There is the matron.
Okay.
There is a leader of the champions. Each school has 20 champions. Then the leader of one champion who has, her key. And then the matron has his, or the patron has his key. And then there is a friend of education coming from the community side. So they go both in tripartite, and then they open that box. And then they open one, they read, they put there, they record. And then they open the second, they read, they record. At the end of the day, they pick those that they can deal with within a short period of time, and then they do the referral for other cases that are in jeopardy to that student as well. And it has been very functional. We have rescued so many girls that were in risk of dropout, and then supporting them with a bespoke support to get back to school.
That's really good to hear. Thank you for that, Bonaventure, and I hope that the minister is actually going to follow up on that. Now, we're running out of time, I do realize that, but my 2 last questions to you, Helen. So we see that the report has used the World Bank Group Gender Strategy Framework. I just learned from it from the report that was sent to me. But can you explain to us the importance and uniqueness of using this framework to understand gender issues?
Yeah, no, thank you. Thanks, Carol, and thanks to my fellow panelists. I think it's been very, very enriching to hear and the passion that's in this topic. So now turning to a strategy, it might seem a little bit dry, but I'll try to keep it engaging and light. So, I think Ya explained very neatly the strategy. It has 4 domains. We talk about access and improvement in endowment. So there is health, it's education. We talk about improving gender equality in economic opportunities, access to jobs. We talk about assets, women having access to financial inclusion, women in agriculture having access to agricultural inputs, and so on. And then finally, we talk about voice and agency. And there we talked a lot about gender-based violence. We'll have a whole session on that. And we didn't talk as much about it, but it's also the role of women in decision-making, in positions of power. We mentioned some of the ministers. Of course, the president now is a woman. But I think the uniqueness of it is that you cannot achieve gender equality if you just address one of those areas. You really need to work throughout. So we've seen there's been progress in endowments. We've seen the enrollment rates have gone out, which is great, gone up, which is great. But if there's not progress in economic opportunities and there are no jobs for girls to get, that education will do some, of course, but it will not fulfill its full potential. And same if a girl is able to get a job, maybe she wants to be an entrepreneur, but she's not able to access credit because there are gender discriminations against women to get access to credit. Her company will not be able to reach its full potential because she's not getting those assets to her. And I think finally in the last domain, and we'll hear more about that, and I think the poetry we heard was very touching.
Very powerful.
If a woman, girls, if there is abuse, if they are held back at home and by social norms, they're not going to feel their potential in any of these areas because I think that's underlying their whole potential. So we need to address it in all these areas.
Okay.
And in the strategy, we talk about it's the importance at the household level, it's in the markets, it's at the institutional level, and it's informal and formal. And just to say, since I'm from the World Bank, sitting here representing the World Bank, just to say that in the World Bank, we roll out this strategy now, and we are looking at addressing women's opportunities, girls' opportunities throughout our different sectors that we have in the World Bank. So we have in Tanzania, for example, we have a big program in transport. We're looking at strategic opportunities to make sure that those projects that we do with the government of Tanzania also looks for opportunities that are strategic to help women and girls.
Right.
We don't want to do a mainstreaming, tick the box. We want to work what matters. We want to be strategic. We want to think about specific activities that can really make a difference in the lives of girls and women and men and boys as well. So we're doing that. We're looking at opportunities in our sector work. We are also looking at on the policy agenda. This is what this event is part of. And then we are also complementing that in some cases with specific projects that are really focused at the core on women and girls empowerment. And we do that a lot in our health and education sectors, in the endowment bucket, but we're also doing it now more and more as an institution to have sort of freestanding operations that have as its core.
Now, based on the findings, how is Tanzania faring compared to other countries? And what are the best practices that we could possibly emulate and replicate in the country?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think Tanzania, it's faring well in some areas and less well in other areas. We've heard the area around fertility, marriage age, low age of marriage, many girls being married off very early. I think that is an area where more work is needed. Gender-based violence, we will hear a lot about that later on today. I think that's an area where Tanzania sadly stands out. Yep. I think on the positive, there is a lot of commitment, right? You have the laws mostly, but there is the commitment from the higher level. There are ways now to moving this forward. But I think in terms of best practices, all these laws, all these assessments, including our own, it doesn't really matter unless we put action behind it. And Jar had that nice slide at the end of our presentation. We need action, and we also need money. We need budget behind it. So Absolutely. I think that is some of the best practices we're seeing. Unless you have the commitment, which I believe Tanzania is standing out on, but we need the budget, and we need now to sort of walk the talk strategically in a way that really matters for girls and women in Tanzania.
Thank you very much for that, Helen. Right, so thank you very much to our panelists. Unfortunately, we have run out of time for this first panel. So I'm just going to do a roundup of, I would say, the key takeaways that I had from this particular discussion. But I think the Deputy Minister Advocate Mpanju spoke about Deputy Permanent Secretary. You claim it. Sorry about that. Deputy Permanent Secretary. I apologize. I don't know what I was thinking. Deputy Speaker. Where did that come from? You may be. Okay, inshallah, inshallah. Right, so the key takeaways, I think for me, the most interesting part was the leading strategic policies that you've mentioned, as well as the sectoral policies that cut across multi-sectoral reforms when it comes to gender mainstreaming, but also in terms of education, what has been done by the ministry when it comes to pushing for girl-child enrollment as well as staying in school, but also the many examples that we've heard, or the one example that we've heard from Bonaventure in terms of how these special schools for girls could actually contribute and encourage girls staying in school. And last but not least, the framework that Helen had mentioned that provides us with an overview, but also an opportunity to do an intersection and an interlinking of sorts to ensure that we have what we call a holistic approach when it comes to gender mainstreaming and gender equality. I would like to thank you, our panelists, and invite you to step off the stage as we proceed to the next segment of our activity. Thank you very much. A round of applause, please. Right, again, I do realize that we're a bit behind time. Apologies for that. However, I'd like to also remind you that we are on live stream, so if you could share that on your pages, that would also be great. But Please note that we will have an opportunity for the online audience to receive questions during the last session, so please feel free. For those who are watching us on YouTube, on live stream, please feel free to type in your questions in the chat box. Right, so now without further ado, I would like to now welcome you to direct your eyes to the screens, please, for the second poem that was prepared specifically for this event from Miss Neema Komba.
Binti Salam. Wanahoji alikuwa nani? Ni mtu maarufu hapa mjini au mtoto wa nani? Maisha yake alikuwa vipi? Ni mrembo, mcheshi au mambo safi? Alivaa nini? Alikunywa nini? Alikuwa wapi? Alifanya nini hadi wamfanyia ukatili? Usiulize alikuwa nani. Yeye ni dada yako aliyekuwa njiani kwenda dukani kununua mahitaji, lakini bila sababu wakamfuta kwenye kichaka, wakaiba thamani yake na kumtupa kama ni taka. Haiba yake wakaichana mithili ya nguo yenye kiraka, lakini wale vijana walisema eti kisa ni kanga. Haikuwa ngumu ya kutosha kuficha maumbile yake machoni mwao. Mwendo wake wa upole uliwaita, wakatamani, wakachukua kwa nguvu kama vile mwili wake ni mali yao. Walimgaragaza chini kwenye kokoto, lakini hata ncha za mawe zilivyochoma mgongo wake hazikuwa kali kuzidi macho yao, yaliyomvua thamani na kumfanya si mtu, si kitu, bali mzoga, mwanamke asiye na haki ya kuishi huru na salama ndani ya mwili wake. Usiulize alikuwa nani. Ni mama yako nyumbani kwake, anayejipa moyo kuwa zimu ili kujualo halikuli likakwisha, na siku moja hapana yake itakuwa halali kwa mume wake, lakini sauti yake haisikiki na kilio chake cha kwikwi hakimsikitishi. Anaendelea kumpiga kama mwizi, tena pamoja na maumivu analazimisha ale zake mbivu bila kujali bado ni mbichi. Huyatazama madonda yake kwa uchu na kusema si mtu, si kitu, bali mzoga, mwanamke asiye na haki ya kuishi huru na salama ndani ya mwili wake. Usiulize alikuwa nani. Ni binti yako wa miaka 6 ambaye hajatambua kuwa jinsia yake kumbe ni mwiba. Jirani yako wa karibu ameamua kumfundisha, na somo lake la kwanza ni kuwa katikati ya miguu yake kuna uwanja wa vita, na jirani ndio komando mkakamavu. Anafyatua risasi bila ya wasi, anamlipua na bomu la oga, na kisha kuuzima mwanga wa nafsi yake ya utoto na kumwachia giza totoro lenye mizimu yenye kumkebehi. Eti si mtu, si kitu, bali mzoga, msichana asiye na haki ya kuishi huru na salama ndani ya mwili wake. Usiulize alikuwa ni nani, wala usioje alikuwa wapi, alivaa nini, alikunywa nini, alifanya nini. Ukatili hauna sababu zaidi ya ukatili, wala si mavazi aliyovaa au njia aliyopita au umri alionao. Kimini, suruali, baibui, zote si salama. Barabara kubwa na uchochoro, zote si salama. Binti mdogo na bibi kikongwe, wote si salama. Nasi tumechoka lawama zenu. Simwakamate hao waliohasi na kulaani matendo yao. Usiulize alikuwa nani. Ni mimi, ni wewe, ni wao, ni sisi. Binti Salam, wanawake wenye haki ya kuishi huru na salama ndani ya miili yetu, wanawake wenye haki ya kuishi huru na salama ndani ya miili yetu.
Oh, wow.
The second poem is called Survivor, and this is inspired by my own experience.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. A little technical thing here going on, but yeah. Wow, that was powerful. That was Neema Komba with our second poem for today. So should I use this one, or do I? Okay, there we go. Thank you. Right. For the second part of our session, we're going to have a discussion on the gender-based violence assessment report, which also drew into the stakeholder engagement that was conducted by the World Bank. But before that, I would like to welcome Ms. Gemma Todd, education specialist from the World Bank, to do a presentation on that. And in the meantime, the panelists for the second session, please get ready.
Honorable Dr. Gwajima, Country Director of the World Bank, Mara Warwick, DPS Advocate Mpanju, esteemed guests and panelists, karibuni sana and good morning. So I'm very humbled to present to you all the findings on behalf of the team. This was very much a team effort, and I'm going to present the findings for the gender-based violence assessment that we have conducted. So let me find the clicker, 1 second. Okay, so the gender-based violence assessment focused on the following elements. We have 6 aspects on your screen. I'm going to really focus and hone in on 5 of these, okay? So we have the background, followed by a scope of the GBV problem in our country. Then we're going to look specifically at the legislative and policy environment. What do our legal frameworks say? Followed by that, we'll look a little bit at the systems and coordination mechanisms responding to GBV, and then look at more detail about the response and prevention programming we have across our country responding to the GBV issue. Concluding, we'll focus on the recommendations as well. Okay. So in terms of background, we really had the following 4 objectives. As mentioned, the first objective was really to look at the scope of the problem, the scope of the GBV issue. Followed by that, we wanted to identify how to directly support efforts to address GBV in Tanzania. We wanted as well to look at how can we better inform strategies for integrating attention to GBV in development programming. And the last core objective was really to better understand the extent of GBV response programming. So to achieve these objectives, we focused on a desk review as well as conducted some stakeholder consultations, which I hope will be able to do their voices some justice today. So to focus on the first question, the scope of the problem in GBV, I think already we've been able to receive a lot of facts and figures about these, and I just want to highlight a few more as well. So we see that GBV in different forms is prevalent across our country, but this extent really varies geographically. So if I give out some facts and figures, we already know 40% of women between the age of 15 and 49 have experienced physical violence. 17% have experienced a form of sexual violence. That means if we were to have 10 women stand up, 4 would have experienced a form of physical violence, maybe in the form of beating or other, and at least 2 of them would have experienced a form of sexual violence. The map on the left-hand side really shows this regional variation. So we see that 44% of women in that same age group have experienced intimate partner violence, meaning that it's happening, the violence is happening from someone close to them. But we have a lot of regional variation. The regions highlighted in red, such as Kagera, Shinyanga, Tabora, seem to be leading in terms of numbers compared to areas like Tanga. We also see as well that 30% of girls have experienced a form of sexual violence before the age of 18. And followed by that, we hear and we have the figure that 58% of women think that the beating is justified. They believe that the beating is justified by their husband. Continuing on the scope of the project, we see that GBV is happening from a very young age. We already know that a large number of girls are experiencing sexual violence before the age of 18. However, we also see as well that 1 in 3 girls are married before their 18th birthday. When we want to compare girls and boys, we also see that the median age at first sex is lower for girls compared to boys. That graph is shown on the left-hand side. We also see as well, if we focus in on children, 75% of children have experienced physical violence by someone close to them, by a relative, again, showing the fact that it's happening from people that these victims know, before the age of 18. And if we want to focus on, again, there are specific groups within this young age that are more vulnerable, more susceptible to experience gender-based violence. For example, adolescent girls, young women, disabled women and girls are more likely to be victims of GBV. We also have a growing number of evidence which shows that boys are also becoming extremely susceptible to violence. Continuing on the scope of the problem, the scope of GBV, we see that certain practices, such as female genital mutilation, as well as certain traditional practices, vary across where they are happening. So focusing on FGM, female genital mutilation, we see overall in our country, this stands at about 10% of women being in the age of 15 to 49 having experienced FGM. But a lot of regional variations. We have, for example, in Manyara, 58% of women experiencing this, compared to the western and southern side of Tanzania. We also see that, again, regions have variation. For example, if we look at Mbeya and Mara regions, women that are married and lose their husband, for example, are more susceptible to be subject to widow inheritance compared to women, for example, in another region. This means that they may be forced to marry their husband's sibling or relative. We also see, for example, traditional festivities that may be more common in certain regions are and have been linked to sexual violence. So practices, for example, like the Vigodoro rituals and others happen in certain regions. So we need to look and understand more these traditional practices and how it's strongly embedded in tradition. So when we focus a little bit on the legislative and policy environment, we know that GBV is prevalent. What does the legal and policy environment tell us? In Tanzania, we're very lucky, and I think we've already had Honorable Minister speak on this, as well as Advocate DPS Mpanju, talk to us about the legal framework in place. We have laws across our sectors, the law of the child, the law of the marriage, the Education Act, that are really responding to the problem of GBV. We also have decisions at the High Court level that are really responding to this problem. One of our panelists is going to speak today, and she's been a great advocate at the involved with the High Court level to make sure that the minimum age that a girl can get married is heightened and is moved up to age 18. We also should be very proud. We are one of the very few countries that have a national plan of action to end violence against women and children. We have that for mainland Tanzania as well as for Zanzibar. This is something that hasn't been achieved across all countries, but we have that. So we have a very good framework in place. So within this positive environment, of course, there are challenges, and we want to receive them as opportunities. On the one side, we have the Law Against Marriage Act of 1971. It still states that the minimum age for marriage is 15. Moreover, we have a problem in enforcing the laws. How do we make sure all of these laws are actually enforced? Lastly, as well, on the National Plan of Action to End Violence Against Women and Children, we have challenges on implementation, which I'll focus on just now. So in terms of the National Plan of Action to End Violence Against Women and Children, we have several achievements. On the achievement side, let's focus on the good side first. We have the establishment of committees down to the district level, the Mtakuwa committees. They are there, they are operating, and they are providing responses directly where people need them. We also have the demonstration of multi-sectoral responses. So for example, we see ministries working together, and it was really nice to hear that conversation on the panel as well. We have the development and institutionalization of national guidelines, as well as training manuals for stakeholders that are working with victims, police officers, social workers, one-stop centers, protection committees. And we also have the rise of regions that are showing us a lot of good practice. We would like to highlight the region of Shinyanga. We already see in terms of intimate partner violence, numbers are high in Shinyanga, but they have developed their own regional national plan of action, which has activities specific to their region, whether it's on awareness raising, community dialogue, bylaws, and interventions at high-risk places such as marketplaces. However, of course, there are challenges. So the first challenge that we'd like to emphasize on the National Plan of Action is the fact that although we have the lead ministry, now we have, of course, Honorable Minister Gwajima from the Ministry of Community Development, Women, Gender, Social, and Social Special Groups. There is, of course, a limitation about how we can hold other ministries accountable, whether in terms of funding or making sure they have the right focal people in place. We have, of course, the challenge of funding, which has already been raised, so we need funds to be able to implement. We have the challenge, we are aiming to decentralize the plan, but how do we make sure that there is the right institutional capacity at all levels, down to the grassroots level? We also have the challenge of making sure that we continue to sensitize police desk officers and other human resources, such as social welfare officers. So in terms of the GBV response and prevention programming, we've grouped these into 3 different subsectors. So on the health sector response side, how we see health sector responding, we have the following. Of course, we have our national referral system. We have our dispensaries, our hospitals, our healthcare clinics, our district hospitals, regional hospitals. They are there and they are ready to receive people. We also have the rollout of the one-stop centers, which of course we understand as well are able to provide some counseling provision. On the psychosocial sector response as well, We see that there are numbers now available for citizens to call up if you have any type of issues. You can call 116 and be able to speak to someone toll-free and receive certain advice. We also have social workers which are now able to identify GBV and violence against children risks. At the school level, we've heard a lot from stakeholders working in education. We know that we have guidance counseling teachers in place, and we also have grievance mechanisms so that children can actually express if something happens. On the legal justice and security response side, we have a lot of positive practices as well going on. In Zanzibar, we recently have set up the fact that designated judges have now been appointed for a special family court. This means that cases of GBV are able to be fast-tracked and receive a quick response. We also see increased effort from the government, private sector, and CSO to actually provide free and low-cost legal aid. We see and have heard about the establishment of the police female network, and also the fact that we have gender and children desks being set up across the country as per the guideline. So across the country, we are responding to this problem, the problem of GBV. And we also see that at the district level, there's a district case management system in place, and our committees are there and functioning. But of course, with this positive picture, some challenges we would like to highlight. On the health and psychosocial response side, we have social workers, yes, but we have a deficit of social workers. It's estimated to have about a 62% of social workers, so we need more people. We also need to continue and make sure that our people are being trained to receive and to be able to handle the cases. Again, the issue of funding. We also received some concerns from stakeholders that many of the healthcare providers were actually somehow perpetuating certain gender norms. We have to remember that within a system is people, and people have certain norms and social ideas, so we need to make sure that we continue to tackle those. Also, in terms of the quality of the service as well being provided, we need to make sure that we continue to focus on a survivor-centered approach. In terms of the legal justice and security response, we have the legal framework in place, but we also see that few cases are reported. We see that prosecution is even lower. So we need to continue to build on that. Even in terms of the infrastructure gap, we have gender and children desks available. However, they haven't all been capacitated across the country. So we need to make sure that they continue to meet the standards that the ministry expects. We also have the continued presence of problematic laws. For example, we've heard about the customary law of inheritance and also the Law Against Marriage Act as well. These seem to, in some ways, contradict as well some of the legal frameworks that we have emphasized. So that is on the response side. However, we always say that prevention is better than cure, right? So in terms of prevention, we have a lot of important findings that are represented in the gender-based violence report, such as the following, where we see the government, CSOs, faith-based actors, and many more working on prevention. To highlight a few, on the government side, we have the National Communications and Outreach Plan, which is being rolled out, and we already heard about DPS, our Deputy Permanent Secretary raise this. There is advocacy happening in the community level. We also see CSOs working on this area as well, directly with communities and beneficiaries. Second. We also see as well in the Ministry of Education and PORAG, President's Office of Regional Administration and Local Government, they are working as well to make sure that some of these social norms as well are tackled and girls continue to stay in school. We've already heard as well a lot about that great work. So a lot of good work is happening. You'll excuse me. Yeah. So maybe let's move forward towards the recommendations, okay? We've heard a lot about what is happening, the scope of the problem, and some recommendations are highlighted in the report, which I hope everyone will have some time to read on in more detail. The recommendations are focused on in three thematic areas. Firstly, on the legislation and policy side, we need to continue to reform our laws, make sure that none of these laws undermine the rights of women and girls. And stakeholders particularly raised the fact that we need to have a specific law for gender-based violence. At the moment, we don't have that in place. We need to make sure that there is sustainable funding for the National Plan of Action so we can implement it and implement it well. We need to make sure that we support and strengthen decentralization So making sure that we don't just stop at the regional level, but we go down right to the grassroots level. We need to also make sure as well that we support and review the National Social Protection Policy and Implementation Plan. On the systems level, which we have talked a bit about in a more overarching way, we need to continue to strengthen national systems for coordination, make sure our ministries are speaking to each other, and also ministry level, but also decentralize that. We need to also invest in improvements to GBV information system, make sure that the data that we are collecting is of quality and we can use that to make decisions. We need to also, of course, make sure that we are engaging with men and boys, which is a big topic that has been discussed so far. On the response and prevention side, we need to continue to invest and strengthen in the response system and monitor how these services are being provided. We need to continue to build human resources, such as, for example, social welfare, one-stop centers, police, and committees, make sure that they are able to do their jobs properly. On mainland Tanzania, maybe we want to consider taking and learning from example of what is happening in Zanzibar with the special family court. Could something like that work in mainland Tanzania? And will that help to fast track some of the cases that we have here? We also need to continue to build legal literacy among the population and make sure legal aid is accessible by all. And lastly, but not least, we need to make sure that we prioritize prevention as much as response. So that includes tackling, of course, social norms. Yes. So I would like to end with a quote, which is coming from one of our stakeholders as well, the Legal Human Rights Council, where they really emphasize the importance of engaging with men and the fact that we can't move forward if we don't move together. She says the following: I give you an example of the FGM program in northern Tanzania. We were involving the mutilators, who were the women, but we saw we were leaving the men behind. The men are the ones who are the perpetrators, not physically, but setting the calendars, giving resources for the FGM festivals and everything else. Involving men has been very successful to reducing the FGM in this region. And she was talking about Mara, Mwanza, and Arusha in this case as well. So asanteni sana, I think I'll stop there.
Thank you very much for that presentation, Gemma. And I think my one key takeaway from this is the gender-based violence law. We really, it's about time we have that. And I do hope that is going to the minister and the ministry. I do hope that they are going to take into account online gender-based violence. I wouldn't be Carol if I wouldn't mention that, because I'm quite a big stakeholder of elimination of online gender-based violence. Thank you again for that presentation, Gemma. I would like to now call on the panelists to come on stage. And before we begin our panel discussion, we'll have a short video that we're going to watch. But before that, allow me to call on Fatma Karume, a human rights activist and an advocate for the rule of law, civil and political liberties. Welcome very much. Our second panelist is Rebecca Gyumi, who is the founder and executive director at Msichana Initiative, our very own Shiro, who is really fighting to end child marriages in Tanzania. So a round of applause for her. I would now like to also welcome the Commissioner for Social Welfare, Ministry of Community Development, Gender, Women and Special Group, Dr. Nandera Mahando. Karibu sana. Also from the civil society, Cecilia Asay, who is the Deputy National Coordinator of Women in Law and Development Africa, WILDAF. Karibu, Cecilia. Last but not least, we have Lucy Tesha, who is a program specialist on ending violence against women and girls at UN Women. Karibu sana dada Lucy. Right, before we begin I'm confusing the mics now. Before we begin our panel discussion, I'd like to direct your attention to the screens so that we can have a representation of voices from the Wananchis, citizens' voices on gender-based violence.
Mimi binti yangu amebakwa. Mwanangu alivyobakwa nilichukua sheria Nilienda kwa mjumbe akataka kunipa ushirikiano, nikampigia mwenyekiti. Lakini nilichogundua pale pale mtaani kwetu kuna mtu alimbeba yule mbakaji kwa kutumia pesa. Mimi pesa sikuwa nayo.
Mabinti wanaolewa wakiwa wadogo sana. Kuna wazazi wengine, kishaona maisha yamempiga kidogo, mwanangu si naye mzuri. Na kuna mtu amekuja au kuna mtu namuona na mwendea, let me nimsogeze pale mtoto wangu. Kwa hiyo unakuta binti anaolewa akienda kwa mume kama hajalawitiwa, kwa sababu kila mtu ana tabia zake na makuzi yake. Lakini pili, kama hajapigwa. Tatu, basi atakuwa amefanyiwa vitu vingine ambavyo atakaa ajute maishani mwake, ambako kisaikolojia kwa hali ya kawaida hatakuwa bora wala vizuri kabisa, na hapo utakuta kashazalishwa.
Mfano hata hii sheria ya ndoa ambayo imefanywa marekebisho mwaka 2019. Moja ground ambayo inaweza mtu ukaichukua kama as a defense kwenda mahakamani kudai talaka ni moja cruelty. Cruelty ni ukatili wa kijinsia, ni kupiga, yani kufanya nini, yani kuiva. Hasa masuala kama haya nguta yanaenezwa na watu wanakuwa na uelewa kujua hivi vitu, tungeweza kidogo kupunguza haya mambo.
Sisi kama mabinti kuweza kujitambua thamani yetu ni ipi, kwamba sisi wenyewe ndio tuwe kipaumbele, mstari wa mbele kuweza kupigania hilo swala, kuweza kuepukana na hizo changamoto, kwa sababu sisi ndio wahanga wa kwanza. Mzazi atakulea, atakuweka katika misingi mizuri, lakini kama usipojitambua na kujipigania mwenyewe, haitosaidia chochote.
Sehemu ambapo tunapeleka malalamiko kama hivyo serikali za mitaa, sijui kwa nyumba ngapi, sijui. Mimi naona wale kama inakuwa hawana msaada, kwa sababu ukiwaelekeza huenda akaja siku moja tu kaongea na yule mtu, lakini siku zingine zote hawezi kutoa na ushauri wote. Bali atakwambia kama litaneni wenyewe au vipi, achaneni mtajua wenyewe. Mara nyingi ndio inapokuwa hivyo. Maana hata mimi naongea sio labda nimeyaona sehemu yananitokea mimi kama mimi ndio naongea.
Kwa wale ambao si tunaelewa kuwa ukatili wa kijinsia ni prohibited, kwamba hautakiwi, natakiwa sasa sisi transfer elimu kwa wale ambao wanafanya vitendo ili kuavoid namba ile watu ambao wanafanya issue kama hizo.
Tokea utotoni mtoto anavaza kukua, unamwekea misingi mizuri, usione aibu kukaa naye kumuelezea kwamba madhara ya mitandao yakoje, madhara yakoje leo katika jamii, kwa sababu wazazi wengi sasa hivi wanaogopa kuongea na sisi. Mbona hasa sisi mabinti wa kike wanaona kwamba au mtoto wa kike ni wa mama, lakini ukute baba ana room nzuri ya kukaa na wewe, kuongea na wewe, hafanyi hivyo kwa sababu hakuna hayo mazoea ya kuweza kuongea. Kidogo hata wamama wanajitahidi kuongea na watoto wa kiume, lakini upande kwa baba ni nadra sana. Yeye anaamini kwamba tayari watoto wamekula, wamepata mahitaji yao, hiyo inatosha, ni which sio sahihi.
Nafikiri nafasi ambayo niko nayo, cha kwanza ni kumsaidia mwanaume ajue nafasi yake kwamba yeye ndo mlinzi. Kuhakikisha anaweka ulinzi kwenye jamii. Kwa hiyo wajibu wa sisi kama wanaume ni kuhakikisha tunawalinda wanawake wote. Uwe kwenye gari, hakikisha uwe njiani, hakikisha kila mtoto wa kike unatakiwa kumpa ulinzi. Yeyote unayekutana naye unatakiwa popote pale ulipo, wewe ni mwanaume, wajibika kuhakikisha ulipo wewe usalama upo.
So the ending note on that was collective responsibility. LCO, like they all have a role to play. So I'm looking forward to that. Actually, Fatma, that's your question. So I'm not going to jump into that moja kwa moja, but I'll start with the Commissioner, Dr. Nandera. We know that the National Plan of Action is coming to a close. So we'd like to hear from you in terms of when you're evaluating its implementation, what were the key successes and achievements, but also what were the key challenges?
Just before going to the NPA VAC success and challenges, I was just thinking about the report that has just been, presented, and I'm still, in my mind, something is telling me there are still some gaps in terms of, we need to think about the report and pathways. How are they? I didn't hear that being talked about that
The
much.
reporting pathways for gender-based violence, okay.
Are the girls, are the women, are they ready to report violence? Do they trust the places that they go to report? Those are the things we need to emphasize and, empower mechanisms of reporting. I didn't hear much about that, but I would also like to talk about the issue, if I compare to my recent report with Dr. Jumanne Gomera, but that is particularly on higher learning institutions in 6 campuses at the University of Dar es Salaam and the University of Dodoma. And when you look at the statistics, they are comparable. So you can see this report that it really tells us. Imagine educated girls still have a little bit higher than the national statistic in terms of issues of GBV. So if you
In higher learning institutions.
In higher learning institution.
Okay.
If you look at men who believe wife beating is okay at our universities, you find that it's 59.9% as compared to women who believe that wife beating is okay, 48.6%. This is a little bit higher. So you need to question yourself, because this is the place where you'd expect that those who are educated will be, more, observant and aware of the situation. So you also find that pathways of reporting are not understood very well. So this is a very important place to look at, and around 31.9% for men versus around almost to 30% for women. They are not ready, and they don't trust the people they go to report to. So we need to look at, is our social welfare officer, the police gender desk, how are they? Are they friendly, user-friendly, and issues like that? But we also need to know that most of these women are going for help, and girls, for example, in terms of sexual reproductive health, to government health centers. So those are areas that really need to be strengthened in terms, but also to allow social welfare officers who can welcome them, counsel them. But another important place that was spoken about was the start of the children protection desks in schools. These are very important areas that need to have a good referral to the district level, but also in terms of reporting. So there should be support in terms of the guidance and counseling teachers who are able to, communicate with the students in school. Of course, there were issues raised about the bad traditional practices, which this requires the inclusion of both men and women, so that many of the activities or interventions that are happening can really reach out to both groups. Bad traditional practices, somebody here was saying, okay, it's the men who think about or who plan about the events. But we really need to think about our aunties and bibis, the grandmas. They are the most initiators of these practices and supporters. Because it happened to us, I was circumcised, there is no problem. When you're beaten by your husband or your boyfriend or partner, no, don't come. Sometimes it doesn't start with okay. It starts with about what is going to happen with the family image. We are religious, sometimes maybe our clan, our family, so, good example set in the village, in the area, so if you report, it becomes a problem for the family. So as a result, this feedbacks into the police gender and children desk, but also the social welfare officers and the law in general, because it becomes difficult, when there are cases, families pull back and they're not ready to support. So we need a lot of not just education, but communication, highly media, also that will go down to villages to change the perceptions of people, and people should come up front and not see a problem when you're violated, that this is my problem. It is not your problem. So just starting from there.
Thank you.
Yeah, then I will move to the NPA VAC committees. Our minister, but also our deputy permanent secretary has spoken to some of these. Well, the NPA VAC now is in the process of reviewing. In fact, right now we have the inception report, and we have the consultant and in the inception report. So that is where the process is. So far, what have we realized for the past 5 years that we've had it? Some have been mentioned already in the report. We have the protection committees, which were started, and these protection committees have assisted women and children. About 18,186 women and children have received services nationwide. And if you compare this with before, you will see that it's an increase of around...
What was the number before?
The number before was 16,843. So it's an increase of 1,843. What does this tell us? It is an increase, but not enough.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so what tells us is, which is what the ministry now is concentrating on and really focusing, is to empower, to enable, in terms of funding, the NPA VAC committees, because these are the ones which are at the ground, from the national level, district, ward, to the village and street level, so that they can be able not just to respond, but also prevent gender-based violences, but also provide children protection. But other successes, as mentioned earlier, we now have 21 one-stop centers around different regions, but we also have there are around 9 safe houses in this country now that are providing services to women. So when you look at...
9 safe houses all over the country?
Yes, all over the country, and the government itself has been able to serve 269 survivors, because we also have a one-stop, a drop-in center and a safe house here in Dar es Salaam at Kurasini. But we have also managed to serve around 1,857 survivors within the 21 one-stop centers. And children, we have been able to serve 1,072 children, and among them, 412 are boys and 660 are girls. Some of the others, I will not mention them though. It seems like the time is not enough. So I'll try to...
Let's go to the challenges.
The highlights. Not just before the challenges, if you may allow me, I would like a bit to talk about. Our Deputy Permanent Secretary really mentioned and spoke of numbers in terms of support of the government in terms of economic empowerment to women. I think that is very important, and it's also part of the success of the NPA VAC. But we also have the Gender Police and Children Desk, 420 countrywide, which has saved around 20,125 cases which were reported. And if you compare just before, you see an increase of around 3,000 cases. So we need also to put more emphasis on this. But now, as we are also, as a ministry, focusing on starting gender desk in higher learning institutions and vocational, and colleges. This is an important area that also needs support, plus the ones that we are starting the children protection desks within primary and secondary school. But I would like to talk about also a bit connected to the NPA VAC is the protection of children. And as you are aware, that the ministry manages 5 juvenile detention centers, and these are in some of the regions here in Tanzania, but we also have one juvenile correctional school. And at this moment, we have around 413 children, which 380 are girls and boys, and 33 are girls, who have passed through and are receiving assistance through the juvenile courts and the correctional school. But if you compare to this, you'll see that the number has really increased from where we come from. So we somehow see a decrease in some of the boys who are passing through the juvenile, but we are having, unfortunately, a little bit of increase in girls. And we also have programs run by these juvenile correctional centers, and 78 children have been able to be reintegrated with their parents, but we also have around 148 children who have been able to be given different, assistance like education, medical service, and so on. But we cannot talk about the NPA VAC without talking of what we are seeing, a lot of the increase of children who are on and in the streets. And the government is really aware of this, and I our minister has already also appointed a committee, and a chair, and they are working to develop a program or a project that will be able to reintegrate these kids, but also to have what we call transit centers. We are having many kids going into the street versus the energy amount or number of kids that we can take into the children homes. So what we are emphasizing is that those who are running children homes now should stop keeping children within the homes unless they are really, children needing adoption. So there are various ways, but children need to be reintegrated back to families so that those centers become areas of rehabilitation and reintegration.
Okay.
And we are able to save these children on the street. So the plan now is to have a transit center, and the Regional Commission of Dar es Salaam has already given us 20 acres at Kigamboni, and we are still working with other regions and districts. What are the success in terms of number? The government has been able to take 3,852 girls from the streets, and among them 135 have been reintegrated, and 821 children have been supported with education, medical and other services, and 75 have been economically empowered in terms of being able to start income generation activities. So let me just say in a short snapshot of that about NPA VAC and the revision going on, which will tell us more in concrete in terms of numbers and progress and failures, and just move to the challenges.
Mm-hmm.
One which is has been mentioned is the inactiveness of the NPA VAC committees. If these committees are really revived, supported well, and funded throughout, these are very good points for being able to see when Swahili we say viashiria, when
indicators
mm-hmm. before, so that they can prevent. But we also need to call all our leaders from, district, ward, village. We have chairmen, we have these street leaders. Why are these things happening? And they come to them, they talk about the problems happening, but people do not report. By the time we get the report, my minister, my permanent secretary, or myself, or a social welfare officer, you hear that the story, my chairman knew, my chairperson knew, or mwenyekiti wa kijiji, and things like that. So why? The family knows about this story. We live with the people. The problem is we don't report them timely so that we can respond before there's a major problem. Because our role as social welfare is not just to respond, we prevent, which is the most important. So that is one, but the second thing is the lack of family support for survivors, as I mentioned, when these issues happen. But also there is a lack of enough human capacity. This is both for the social welfare officers, but also for the community development officers. But a glaring number is among the social welfare officers, and this was mentioned also by my minister back, I think not very long, where we really know that if you go to ward level and village level, where the people are in the street level, there's a glaring of 96.9. Lack of social welfare. What can we do as stakeholders? This is a very good area where stakeholders can come and support community development officer and social welfare officer in terms of internship programs, or throughout the project, stakeholders should be including interns in terms of employing social welfare officers and community development officer. This will help to cut down the number. Another challenge that we have is, of course, and we've spoken about, is the bad traditional practices, which are led for various reasons, but also encouraged and, supported by even our own parents. So I think it's high time we make sure, as many have also said, we involve both boys and the girl child, because changing the attitude and culture is a long process. It takes a while, and it's a multi-sector, as we're saying. Right. Maybe I should mention a few of that before I take all the time.
Yes,
Thank
please.
you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dandera. Right, so over to you, Fatma. We We have seen, well, the numbers are not very encouraging to say the truth, but I was just trying to do a quick math of, for example, the 3,800 girls who have been taken out of the streets, but only 135 have been integrated. But then it also speaks to access to services. And in this particular instance, it speaks to access to legal rights. So from your experience as a lawyer, how is this access to legal rights for women when it comes to gender-based violence? And what would be the role and place of men to either encourage or motivate access to legal rights?
First, good morning, everybody. And first of all, I'd like to start with one of the last comments that Dr. Nangela discussed. Sorry, it's
Dr. Nandera.
Yes, Dr. Nandera. Okay, Nandi discussed, which is she basically said that when you have GBV committed at sort of the ward level, families will say, well, our chairman of the ward knew. So what we're getting, what is clear from that type of statement is people are reporting. Families are reporting. The issue here is, why isn't anything done about it? Okay, so there's failure. Failure is not from the family side and families reporting. There is failure from the part of the executive, okay, from the part of government. What is going on that this is not filtering through? Now, it's all well and good to have these, sorry, I beg your pardon.
We're living in a digital world, it's
okay. Sorry. It's all well and good to have these draconian laws on protecting women, for example, draconian punishments. Let's call them draconian punishments, because you do have, I call them draconian because a person who commits, let's say, rape against a woman will be put in prison for 30 years. There's no mitigating circumstances, nothing. And so the punishments are extremely draconian. But we have these laws and the government says we protect women. Well, you don't. You don't protect women because there are 4 points to penal laws. One is rehabilitation, the other is punishment, isolation, and deterrence. When women are being raped and they're being victimized to rape, and no one gets punished, you're not protecting us. Because there's no deterrence. These men and other men will be encouraged to continue raping. There's no isolation. You're not protecting us. These men should be isolated. You're not protecting us because you're not punishing them. You're not protecting us because you're not even bothering to rehabilitate them. So something has to be done about this. When you do not prosecute offenders, you do not protect us as women. We continue to be victims. And it's not for want of women complaining. It's for want of government taking action. So this needs to be resolved, and it needs to be resolved quickly.
And you would say the 30-year sentence is not enough? There's still more
I'm
to be
not
done.
suggesting that.
Okay.
Now, we're going on to draconian sentences. When you look at, in any criminal justice system, you have to look at the point of punishment. Any punishment must fit the crime for society to accept it. If the punishment does not fit the crime, society will reject it. Consequently, what happens is the people who are tasked with implementation and execution of the criminal justice system balk, and they're not happy to implement punishments that do not fit the crime. So it is a shame that the government hides behind these draconian punishments, that 30 years, no mitigation, the judge has no power to decide who, you could have statutory rape, for example.
Yeah.
Statutory rape is a child, I'll explain what statutory rape is. So if you have sexual intercourse with a child who's under 15 years old, that is considered a statutory rape. You have a 17-year-old young man in school. He has a little girlfriend who is in the year below. They're experimenting, as boys and girls do. They kiss, they experiment, and she ends up being pregnant. He's 17, or he's 18. Let's say he's 18, he's adult. You're going to imprison him for 30 years because of statutory rape? Really? We don't. He's 18, I said.
What if he was 17?
So,
you don't?
Okay, you don't, but 18, you do.
So you're suggesting that the age...
We have to, it's these knee-jerk reactions to social problems by implementing draconian punishments do not assist us as women. By legislating draconian punishments do not assist us as women. This is where you get mwenyekiti wa mtaa refusing to take the issue up. This is where you get a policeman refusing to take the case to court and saying, oh, sort it out amongst the family. Because he's looking at this 18-year-old boy and thinking,
30
really?
years, yeah.
30 years?
Yeah, okay. But wouldn't you say that 30 years is the rehabilitation that you're actually speaking into? Because prison is supposed to be rehabilitation.
Listen.
No?
Listen. If manslaughter, let's try and be, I'm not suggesting, look, there are crimes, GBV has variations. You can have gang rape.
Yeah.
So someone who gang rapes somebody else gets 30 years. There are 10 of them. Gang raping a woman, 30 years. An 18-year-old who impregnates his girlfriend
gets 30 years.
Gets 30 years. Come on.
So there should be different punishments
We
depending on the variations.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now, if you go to a policeman and you say there's been gang rape, he's more likely to say, yeah, round them all up. We're taking them to court. And the gang rape was with violence, with knives, beating. So there has to be this issue about setting a minimum punishment without, it's a knee-jerk reaction, without actually taking into consideration mitigating circumstances or circumstances that worsen issues, This has to change. It's not helping us, I can assure you. We have to look at, in England anyway, you don't have 30 years for rape.
What do they have?
It depends.
Okay.
It depends.
So it's the variations that you were speaking
Variations. It depends what happened. It depends. There are mitigating circumstances. There are also circumstances that worsen the offense, and the punishment becomes higher. So a judge or a magistrate has discretion, but the discretion is very, very controlled, so that you set out what circumstances you have to take into consideration.
Okay.
To reach up to the 30 years, for example.
Right.
And I don't think a minimum 30 years has done us as women any justice. In actual fact, it's taken our course back years and years and years.
Okay.
Because the people in the system are men, and they're not happy to implement this punishment, which has no variations, it has no color, it's just flat 30 years. So I think this is something we have to think about really, really carefully. And I know The problem is, of course, the concept that it was sold by government to women as government, I remember 1998, gosh, clearly. It was 1998, I believe it was, after the Beijing conference and so on. This was sold to us women as government standing up for our rights and coming down hard on these rapists. And we have to research and see, has this worked for us? The reality is, it hasn't. So we have to know, why hasn't it worked for us? Because I need to see people being prosecuted, being rehabilitated, being punished, being isolated, and deterrence.
Okay, so just a quick one. You've spoken about what happens after one gets access to legal aid, right? Now let's talk about the access itself. How would you rate the situation when it comes to women in Tanzania and access to legal rights? Leave alone what they find when they try to access it. Can they access it? We have organizations like Will Darfur offering legal aid, but how accessible are those services to the majority of Tanzanian women across the piece?
Okay, so first of all, I'd like to, I know I'm going to sound how can I put it, negative, but I like to be frank and honest about things. Okay. I'll start from the very beginning. I don't believe that our laws protect us at all. You know, the Education Act doesn't protect the girl child. Dr. Mpanjo, it doesn't. You need to work on that. We have to look at our abortion laws. We have to be honest. Dr. Gwajima, you're a doctor by profession. A 13-year-old being raped and having her body torn apart at childbirth. Being exposed to fistula because she has to give birth at the age of 13. Shouldn't she be allowed to abort? We have to look at right to inherit. Right?
Right.
We don't have laws here on the mainland with respect to women inheritance.
What about online gender-based violence?
It just keeps going on, and I don't know how to switch
Maybe
it
they're
off.
watching live. Maybe they want to ask a question. Maybe they're trying to say, no, Fatma, don't say that.
So we don't have right to inherit here.
Okay.
Okay. Women's rights to inherit are not protected. They should be. When I first came back to Tanzania from the United Kingdom, as a new lawyer, I was involved in Taula, and we used to do a lot of work for women. And we were calling for we've been calling for an inheritance law since 1992. When I first came back here, we've been calling for inheritance law. The government has done nothing about it. I'm aging. I'm now a 53-year-old. I'm still sitting here waiting. When? You know, more than 25 years on.
But what would you say is the holdup? What would you say is the holdup? If we're all about gender mainstreaming and gender equality, what is the holdup?
Ask the men. I don't know. We've been talking about this. I mean, Dr. Mpanjo said men should lead. No, they should support us, not lead us. We need your support on this. We need you to support us on this. We need this law. We need girls back to school. We need a Fair Inheritance Act. Now, I'm going to say something about Zanzibar, because I read in the report, there's a section in the report that talks about the Qadhi's Court Act in Zanzibar and how it doesn't give rights, maintenance rights and EDA rights to women. You've got the wrong act. The Qadhi's Court Act was amended in 2017, and Section 5 of the Qadhi's Court Act gives all these rights: maintenance, EDA, division of matrimonial assets, Sadly, it is according to contribution, financial contribution, but that is Islamic law because we're bound by Islamic law.
How do they quantify that, the financial contribution?
It's how much you put in. What you put in, you get out.
Oh, okay.
Yes, so what you put in, you get out. So if you put in as a woman 25%, you'll get 25% out. The problem though, and this is very important, it works very well for wealthy women.
Yeah.
It works terribly for women who are housewives, or they maintain the home, okay? So they don't have the finances to put in. But there's also maintenance out when you leave. In Islamic law, it's called muahar. But in Kiswahili, it's called, I'm going to throw this.
And that would be my cue to actually say, can you please round up, because I need to, yeah?
Yeah, in Swahili, it's called kitoka nyumba.
Kitoka nyumba.
Yes. So if you're a Muslim woman getting divorced in Zanzibar, you are entitled to a lump sum fee to leave the house. They have to pay you. It's either lump sum or maintenance on a monthly basis.
And that is not based on the financial contribution that they had?
No, it's
okay.
your right
okay.
as a woman,
okay.
including the EDA, including maintenance for the children, and so on. So all these are set out clearly under Islamic law, and whatever gifts your wife, your husband gave you, you get to keep.
Right.
He cannot take away anything he gave you. So if he bought you a car, he can't just come and take it, and so on. So, or he contributed to building you a house, you can't take that, because whatever a man gives a woman during marriage, he cannot take it back.
Now, just a quick one, as you finalize, the role of men, because I know you said men need to support us, but how do we go beyond that? How do we actually make this materialize? How do we get them to support us, dismantle the patriarchy, and move together? Because that seems to be the main critical issue for years and years.
Well, that's a very difficult question because, patriarchy has not been dismantled, I think, anywhere in the world. It's just a question of how bad it is. In Europe, it's still there. In America, it's still there. I mean, an African-American man became president. A white American woman didn't. So you can see that we're sort of at the bottom of the food chain as women. But so far as patriarchy is concerned, I think the only way we can work on this is through education. But there is a doctrine, a legal doctrine, on how you use legislation. So there's two ways you can use legislation. You either legislate because the society wants changes and then this percolates up, not down, percolates up, and you legislate to make the societal, to reflect societal changes.
Right.
Or, and this is extremely important, Dr. Mpanjo and Dr. Gwajima, or you can legislate and it can percolate down and create societal change.
So sort of like a spillover effect.
Exactly.
Okay.
So these are the two things you can do, how you can use the tool of legislation. Okay, you legislate either to reflect what the societal needs, or you legislate to create societal changes. A government that legislates to create societal changes is a government that understands what it wants and has to have guts. It has to have mettle to do it.
And our government doesn't?
And the question is, and this is the question, and this is the question.
Yes.
And this is the question. And this is the question. Does our government have the mettle to use legislation to create fundamental shifts in our society? Thank you.
Okay, brilliant. So this metal, now going over to Rebecca. we have seen you fight against this metal, right? But we've also seen that one of the key recommendations on changing the minimum age of marriage, which we know you have played such a big role, and congratulations for that, Rebecca, in advocating for. But what do you think is limiting us when it comes to making groundbreaking change? What is not happening, Rebecca? What more do you wish to see from the government, from the stakeholders?
Thank you very much, Carol. I think it's afternoon already, if I'm not mistaken.
Almost.
Okay.
Almost.
Okay, good morning, good afternoon. It's such a pleasure to be here and contribute on this topic. Well, maybe to go straight to the question, I think we might want to learn or be reminded that the process, which I would also borrow Fatma's words, the process to legislate, because somehow the government saw the issue of child marriage, started as far as 1990s, when the Nyerere Commission gave out the report detailing on some of the bad laws in the country. The Law of Marriage Act was among the laws which was clearly listed in that report, and specifically also indicating issues of child marriages. So you would say from 1992 to now, which I would say is almost the same time as the law of inheritance you were talking about, and the action that we decided to take in 2016, because we saw minimal progress, despite of the fact that the issue of child marriage was really affecting a lot of girls in Tanzania. We thought we wanted to see a more bold action, to amending this law. So the question as to why from 2019 to 2022, as we are speaking right now, the government is yet to codify the changes or the amendment that the Court of Appeal actually directed to the government, I think it speaks a lot of volume about the non-adherence to the rule of law in our country. Because under the principle of rule of law, judicial independence is important to the doctrine of the separation of power. And when you have the Court of Appeal directing the Parliament through the Attorney General to amend this law within 1 year, and then 1 year lapses, and then you see discussion in the Parliament that we need to go back to the community to conduct consultation so that the community members can actually say, what is their stand on the amendment. I think it speaks volume to the issues of judicial independence, rule of law, and how as a country we are living the doctrine of separation of power. And I would like to quote one community member from Kigwe last year when we were having conversations with members of parliament regarding, their role in the execution of this judgment. And without mentioning names, some of the members of parliament they're actually indicating the need to have consensus before this law is amended, as what the court has actually directed. And then this member of the community, anaitwa Mzee Miraji from Kigwe, Dodoma, he was furious. He actually stood and said, you know what I remember, and that was 2020, actually. He said, no, actually that was 2021, I'm sorry. He said, as far as I remember, you are supposed to be representing the section of our community as our leader in the parliament, because we cannot all, as community members, be in the parliament.
Yeah.
When the Court of Appeal, because of all the back and forth, including your own, as a government, grounds as to why you thought this law should not be amended, but the Court of Appeal actually affirmed that there were credible ground as a community that we need this law changed, direct you within a specific period of time that 1 year, this law should be amended, and then put 18 as a minimum age of marriage. And then you are saying you want to take that order to the community members to discuss if they want it or not. Are you saying we were wrong to have you as leaders in the parliament?
Like you were supposed to represent.
Exactly, because that's exactly what you were supposed to be doing as, our representative, amending this law, giving the onus to us as wananchi to come and build consensus around the issue that was clearly your directive. It leaves a lot to be desired. And I think that contributes to my response as well. I feel like sometimes, and I'm speaking honestly, there are issues when it comes to how members of parliament or the government subject itself to the issues of law and vice versa. Because if clearly there was an understanding that, this law was this decision was supposed to be executed within 1 year, we have seen so many laws being changed within a week, 2 weeks, and sometimes even without our consensus. We have this clearly, as something that the Court of Appeal has decided on, but still there is minimal progress to that. So I think it speaks volume to the issues of non-adherence to the rule of law. And another thing that I wanted to speak about, which I know many people sometimes talk about, is the issue of compromise. That maybe government want to compromise, with issues of...
on what? What are they
That's what I'm trying
on?
to explain. They're trying to compromise with the religion, with a traditional section of our communities. But in 2020, I was lucky enough through the support of UN Women Tanzania to be in a delegation with some of the members of the government. And we traveled to Abu Dhabi, the United Arab Emirates. And I think many of us know it's an Islamic state. But they have 18 as a minimum age of marriage. So sometimes we also need to question the issue of religion really. Is it just our own interpretation, or it has to do with, how maybe also our commitment and political will is to this issue? But secondly, you look at, neighboring countries like Malawi, for instance, or countries like Zimbabwe. Malawi is hugely traditional, and they're proud of that. But they were able to amend their law through parliament. Zimbabwe, they took, of course, the strategic litigation route as well, but they were able to also amend not just the law, put 18 in their constitution. So what, to your question, what is limiting us in making this groundbreaking change? I would say first is that our non-adherence to the rule of law, but also understanding issues of, separation of power, and the power that the MPs actually are vested in our constitution, to actually implement this law, enforce, execute this ruling. And secondly, of course, is the issue of commitment that sometimes, and this is where transformative change sometimes lacks, because not many times we are ready to make bold moves, bold decisions when it comes to protecting the gain, or when it comes to advancing gender equality in our country. And to me, those are some of the reasons I think why we are taking time to really make this groundbreaking change.
Thank you for that, Rebecca. Right, so because of time, I'm just going to go over to Cecilia from WILDAF. Now, I know that WILDAF as a CSO is doing quite a lot of work on the ground. You've tried to go to rural areas with the Carib you have so many initiatives, but what would you say is the key barrier when it comes to ending violence against women, considering that you're part of the National Plan of Action against, in the elimination of violence against women?
Thanks, Carol, for the question. As WILDAF, being also part of the implementers and also working very closely with the Ministry of Community Development and also part of the technical team as well of the NPA up to the national level, what we've come to understand as a challenge and the biggest barrier that prevents from the realization of the National Plan of Action to end gender-based violence is the players themselves understanding their roles and responsibilities. Last year, after the...
Just for context, who are the players?
The players are here, the committee members themselves, And here we're talking about local government leaders as well, who are also part of the NPA VALC, and also religious leaders. There are also paralegals in it, and there are also teachers and CSOs as well as a partner who are working closely with these committees.
Okay.
So these players, most of them, if not all, do not understand their roles and responsibilities in preventing and response to gender-based violence. And this was clearly realized when we were conducting the reflection after launching the 16 Days of Activism last year in 25th of November. We had a reflection meeting with these players and also some of the committee members so that we may see why we're still lagging, why we have not reached, because the plan of action is coming to end this year, why we haven't reached to the 50% of to end gender-based violence to women and children. And most of them admitted that they did not understand their roles or responsibilities because they have not been capacitated to do so. So this is a challenge that there are these committees which are formed, but are they effective? Are they efficient? So with this, and this is also evident with some of the committees that we engage with. And I had an experience with a committee in Rungwe in Mbeya, where we are implementing a project there. In this committee in Rungwe, they've had various interventions, they've received training. So even when we were engaging with them, you could see that they really understood their roles and they really understood their responsibilities. And even in the former Deputy Minister of, by then it was Health and Community Development, Ms. Mwanhamisi Ali Hussein, I think, visited and she saw that it was exemplary. But in that same district, there's another municipality because there's Rungwe and there is Busokelo. In Busokelo, they've never received an intervention and they're expected to be holding these quarterly meetings. Okay. And even in the meeting, they cannot even comprehend what they're supposed to do. So this is a call also to stakeholders and to partners, development partners that we're working with. Before engaging with them in these quarterly meetings, they have to be made well aware of their roles and their responsibilities to understand so that they can be in a position to implement. Because even some of them live in the society, well, if they're not aware that what they're doing or their action amounts to gender-based violence. But also another barrier is also in capacity in sectors like in the police gender and children desk. We know that they're being established, they're there, but are they capacitated to handle, and are these police gender and children desks have the proper infrastructure to ensure that they cater for all people who go there? Because now the minister is right here, Gwajima, with the special group need, the special need. Some of them cannot even access them, and some of them cannot even be accommodated or be heard because of the challenges that they face and the barrier that they have to reach that point. And another challenge as well is with regards to coordination. I know that there are a lot of other players also who are engaged with the committees, but sometimes we duplicate effort and then we invest in one areas, but if there were clear communication or a clear mapping so that we may know that the committees that have been reached and those committees that have not been reached, so that more intervention can be put into those committees. And also just to respond on what my learned sister Fatma Karume here was saying about these cases being reported, but the government is not doing anything. Sometime in the way when we're dealing with the families of survivors and the survivors themselves, they become non-cooperative. And we know that we need their cooperation so that we can prosecute the perpetrators to the full extent of the law. And this is also due to cultural norms which are there, that, okay, all other things are taboo, that an act of violence is committed to a child, maybe in a family, and they want to keep it protected, and they don't want to come out and report it. So that's a challenge that we also have to deal with. And Rebecca mentioned about religious leaders and their approach on, and their stand on underage girls being married.
Right.
This is an area as well which I see as an opportunity to include them more and to have more intervention with religious leaders so that they may understand. Because I know in areas where we had not a one-day training, two-day training, but more than 3 to 4 days, they get to that understanding, and they've made commitment, and they even made action plans that they're going to be using their platform to advocate for rights and also to discourage such norms which are continuing. But still, the effort is little. and the areas of coverage is still little. So a lot needs to be done to ensure that they get well engaged, and also we include all other stakeholders so that this can be supported. Also, I'd like to raise on a point where Honorable Dorothy Gwajima visited the coalition, Mkuki Coalition, GBV Coalition, which is coordinated by us, WILDAF. It was this year in February. She visited our office at WILDAF and also at Kipunguni. And then she saw some of the practices that we do to ensure that we include the community from the grassroots level and that they are all well coordinated. And after that, as a result of that, she also formed a task force. And now we are actually in the process of working with our concept notes. There are 2 task forces that are formed, one of them which is strictly GBV and how the implementation of Mtakua, and another one, I know you are part of it as well, Carol, it was on digital technology, which we'll be having our meeting this week on Friday. And with this, we were tasked by the minister to see the challenges and to see how, as a whole, the CSO, the government, and other stakeholders can come up with a presentation which we are sure that we'll be presenting to her this month in April, so that we can see that we're on the same page and how we can move from there. Okay. And back also on reforms on the laws as well. I know this has been a very long process. I agree with my lady sister, Fatma Karume, and also Rebecca, but still there's another intervention. Fatma, I wish you could join it. It's called Kikuhami. That Kikuhami also is also coordinated by WILDAF as well, which we are also advocating for the change of the law of inheritance. And last week I was in Dodoma, where we had the privilege. By then he was the Minister of Constitutional Affairs and Constitutional Affairs and Legal, and also the Deputy Minister, who also called us as well, so that we can see what is not going right, because it has been a long process and it has been continuous engagement. But we believe now, with the commitment that the government is showing and the effort that they have made, it might lead to where we want to be, or to where we wish to be as well. And just to stress as well,
as you finalize,
as we finalize, like when we talk about gender-based violence, and this is something that we've experienced when we're dealing with police officers and also other stakeholders, they're only limited to physical and sexual, but there's psychological violence as well. And again, Carol, this was a case that was referred to us by you, where when we went to intervene, the police from the gender and women desk was saying she's okay, she's not harmed. But after we talked to her and after we interviewed her, we saw that she was distraught and she was not okay psychologically, and we felt that it would be prudent for her to be removed. So another challenge presented itself there, that we have a lack of safe houses. Mm-hmm. So from there, we have a lack of safe houses, and we had to give her harbor till she was okay, till she could orient herself and continue. So it's a call for all of us also to give the weight it requires when it comes to other forms of gender-based violence, and not just physical and sexual, but there's also psychological, which is not spoken and which is just viewed as something minor, but it's a very, very, very serious thing in our community.
Thank you so much for that, Cecilia, and thank you for bringing to light online gender-based violence, but also the interventions that you guys are carrying out when it comes to addressing GBV in the country. Right, last but not least, Dada Lucy. I know that UN Women has been doing quite a lot of work. You're the key stakeholder in this area when it comes to development partners and international organizations in Tanzania. But from can you talk to us about the distinctions between mainland Tanzania and Zanzibar? Why is the data varying, first of all? Why is the outcome varying? Why are we seeing a different situation in Zanzibar compared to Tanzania mainland?
Thank you so much, Carol. And thank you, World Bank, for bringing in this kind of a dialogue. This is among the few dialogues that have been organized, and I could see now different stakeholders are sharing their experience, but also based on the assessment that have been conducted. I could say there's not much of vary rather than implementation, because when you look at the experience and actually the prevalence is there. Mm-hmm. And you can't say 14% the prevalence is low the violence is violence. Whether it's 1, it's 2, it's 3, it's 4, violence is violence. So in this case, we could see in Zanzibar, the issue is the government ownership. I could see it has been becoming a big issue, a priority. And the ownership is not only at the higher level, it's also at the lower level. But also when you look at the similarities with Zanzibar, they also have the National Plan of Action, National Action Plan. They have also committed also staff who have been following up. The coordination structures and system are being strengthened. And also we could see at some point in Zanzibar, there is a little bit of reallocation of resources in terms of implementation and the integration within their development plans. And when it comes to also prevention, where there is a lot of advocating for the toxic masculinity and other outdated practice, you'll find the government, they're taking the ownership. The CSO, compared to the mainland, where you'll see most of the civil society, the community themselves,
the ones who
they
are
are
at the
the ones
forefront.
who are bringing in. But from Zanzibar, you'll see even the government themselves, they are taking it as a concern, and they are working together with the community, and they are looking at the in terms of reviewing. You will see even when compared to mainland Zanzibar, there are a lot of laws that have been reviewed. The Spinters Act, the Kadhi's Court, and the other laws, the Penal Code.
Right.
Those are kind of, you could see the demonstration of the commitment from the government. And actually from now, they are talking of the standalone Gender-Based Violence Act. And they actually is already in their commitment, and they are looking forward. Now they have the National Plan of Action, which is going to expire maybe next year, but they want by the end of the National Plan of Action, the standalone Gender-Based Violence Act to be in place. So as part of the evaluation of the programming. But at the same time, I wanted to ask, to address the issue of even the data. The Zanzibar now, they have centralized data. The chief government statistician, OCGS, have established even a gender unit within the department to oversee the gender implementation, the gender mainstreaming, but also to look at the gender disaggregated data, including the GBV. Now, they don't, when you look at the referral pathways, they are trying to strengthen, to digitize it now in terms of data, even dissemination. For now, there is a quarterly release of data on GBV, and actually that one are coming up to the district level, and actually from there it informs the government plans to see what is the problem, where, and more analysis are being done in terms of the implementation. So just to give you the highlights of what is moving on in terms of the implementation of the National Action Plan.
Right, and just to finalize, the role of development partners in this, because we've heard a lot of concerns in terms of the barriers. So I heard a lot of capacity building, funding coming across, et cetera, Would you say that funding these interventions and programs is a bit limiting to you? Are they coming in at the point of finance? What else could be the role of partners?
Very good question. I could say there is a lot of development partners who have been engaging in addressing violence against women and girls in the country, in Tanzania. And there is a lot of system and structures that are already there to coordinate the implementation. So development partners are also called to be part of the process and to ensure that the government take the ownership. Shouldn't be the donor-driven agenda rather than the government-driven agenda. So that could be also a takeoff from us as development partners to ensure that we also look at the priorities within the government. What is the priority? What are the areas? And actually also to look at the context around the issues in terms of supporting. Again, the issue of short-term funding is also a challenge. you can see experience from the development partners, especially when it comes to advocacy work.
Yeah.
People feel like it's engage a lot of resources, time consuming, and you might not find the impact over a year. Also, they need to report with their funds. So at the end of the day, they are looking at the construction, in which sometimes the mindset is the big issue rather than the construction. People, if they change their mindset, the construction might not be useful. Nobody will go there because people understand, maybe few of them. So also, we need also to look at the long-term way of supporting the initiative by the government. We should also take the advocacy as also a cornerstone to change people's mind so that people can also become part and parcel of the process. The other issue I wanted also to raise in terms of role of development partners is coordination among themselves. Let's join the efforts, joint programming, looking at our comparative advantage. UN agency, they work, development partner, bilateral partner, international organization. Let's join the efforts and support for the implementation, whether it's response, whether it's prevention. Yeah. Let's also work together and looking at our our comparative advantage, but also division of labor among ourselves. Some of the development partners have area of expertise. Some of them, they don't. Some of them, they work in different sectors. So let's collect ourselves, have one package rather than have a piecemeal intervention. Right. That is much I could say in terms of the role of development partners. Just to give you an example, is the advantage of Tanzania, the beauty of Tanzania. Tanzania is also have a very good reputation in terms of joint programming. Even within the government, the joint assistance strategy of 2000, I could say 20 years back, was a good example in terms of coordination between the government and the development partners. You could see the development partners now, they have their own working groups. They have DPG gender, DPG health, HIV and AIDS, and so many other sectorial working groups. Need to work together, join, give government the ownership, prioritize the government, and also support them on the ground from the national level down to the local level. And it shouldn't be only ad hoc activities. Okay. The other issues also I want to finalize is about the development partners. We understand most of the development partners, they have their own gender strategy from their respective country. So we should also ensure that all those gender strategy and the action plan, like the one which we are looking at the gender assessment within the World Bank. Let's try to ensure that we domesticate, we integrate into our programming with the respective countries or partners, stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you, Dada Lucy. Not to rush you off, but we're really behind time, and I'm informed that the Honorable Minister has to leave. So 1 minute, Tandandera, please close it off for us.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to take off from Lucy. Thank you. What you're saying to stakeholder is what the government is saying now to stakeholders. I want to take off from Dada Fatuma. You need to integrate law and culture to be able to change. As an anthropologist, I always see regulations and policies alone without change of the attitude and mind, which is a long-term issue, is not difficult. So I would like to answer your question in short, because I have a few minutes. Does the government have the metal? Yes, we have the metal. Her Excellence Samia Suluhu Hassan very well understand that she had recently already done what others have not done. Take girls back to school. That is a step. But beside that, she has been able to create a generation equality forum, which has a chair and members, and it's working towards gender economic empowerment. She has started to do that. This is a process that cannot be done in one day. Let's give her a chance to do more. A lot of programs are already working. And you know what great she has done? We have the Ministry of Community Development, gender, women, and special group. That means she has developed a tool to do all the things we've been talking about. Besides the challenges and success, she has created the tool for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Amesahau kitu kimoja, kumshukuru rais. Si ndio? Apparently that's the trend. But anyways, thank you very much, Dr. Nandera. I wish I could have given you one more minute as the panelists to actually give. Unfortunately, I can't because I have to have Nova now. Really, we will keep the conversation going, but I just want to ask if we have any questions from the online platform. Anything from YouTube? That's good. Thank you, because that saves us enough time. Right, so thank you very much, our panelists, for that great discussion. I would highly encourage all of us, since we have lunch, we can still mingle, we can still engage, we can still continue to converse on the issue. I would like to now welcome you to step off the stage. A round of applause, please, for our panelists. Thank you very much. Right, now I would like to welcome, without further ado, closing remarks from the honorable guests. Honorable Dr. Gwajima, karibu sana for our closing remarks.
Jamhuri ya Muungano wa Tanzania. Asanteni sana, najua mmechoka sana, muda umeenda, watu wamekaa wamesikiliza bila hata kutoka. So just for the benefit of those online and those who can't hear Swahili, let me try to speak in English in a brief, just 3 to 4 minutes. I'm not intending to take a lot of time because I believe everything has been said adequately. May I take this opportunity to thank all the participants of this forum, of this event today, from even those who are online following us, and you who managed to attend the physical. I thank the panel team, both teams. They were very organized, and it was exciting today to meet Fatuma Karume, our activist. Thank you very much. And I'm sad that she has been waiting for many years to hear something changed from the law. But let me assure you that that's why President Samia Suluhu Hassan has decided to establish a full-fledged ministry to go deeper, to see these challenges on how to address. So I inspire you, keep dreaming, keep expecting, and we will move together from today and onwards so that we can get your experiences and from all other panelists. This assessment report, we can agree it has opened up our minds so that to make us able to see how far we have excelled in fighting to combat gender-based violence. We have been able to see what is the gap and figure out how we can go ahead as a team to ensure that what we expect to be vividly comes 2025. From the opening remarks given by myself and Dr. Mara Warwick, in the panel discussion, we have raised many issues and discussed here. It seems people know what is the problem. People, they know how to go forward, and they are able to join hands with the government to have this journey finished successful. I would like to repeat all the points raised by the panel. However, from very few issues we had from Honorable Mpanju trying to clarify the role of men in this fight against gender-based violence. And the others said, also he added what the government so far has been doing in different times in various settings to ensure gender violence is ended. However, the performance of the current intervention have been said clearly by Dr. Nandera to make you understand that the government is very serious. Even seeing me today from morning, sitting here with you, do you agree? Yes. I would have just finished with my opening remarks and left you alone. I said, no, this issue is crucial. It's about the life of Tanzanians, and the panelists and all members of the panel who left all their issues just to come here and support the government. I should be the first to show the commitment. I told Dr. Mara I will stay up to the last minute. This is what. The panelists, some of the panelists mentioned about economic empowerment as a key determinant to fight this gender-based violence. However, they said we need a holistic approach. Yes, we agree on that. Therefore, I want to assure you that the sixth government administration under the leadership of Her Excellency Samia Suluhu Hassan is critically committed to ensure the story of gender-based violence is coming to an end. Therefore, my short remarks, I want to end with this, just sharing with you what I think is a way forward. The first step was to do this assessment. The second one, to share this report actively, as we have just done it. And not only sharing, but finding those active members of these communities, experienced one and vocal one, to come here and share their views. My role and my team was to listen, understand, and accept all these ideas. The next way forward on behalf of the government is to establish a committee, as I said, of multi-sectoral members. Others will also come from this panel of today. Others will come from a different kind of stakeholders. Once we formulate this committee, the next step will be to share with all ministries, because the issue of gender-based violence is a cut-crossing issue. We need people from education, the Ministry of Education. We need people from the Ministry of Internal Affairs. We need people from the Wizara ya Sheria na Katiba. We need a diversity of membership to join this technical working team, so that they sit down critical under the leadership of the Permanent Secretary and our National Social Welfare Commissioner, Nandera, together with the World Bank, who did this report. They go critically to review the previous plan, previous policies, previous interventions, and current interventions required and strategize on resource mobilization for action. Once we are able to organize ourselves this way, I'm very sure 3 months later, we will be able to sit down here again and review how did we precisely utilize or consume the ideas given by members of this event of launching today. So, thank you very much for being here today with us. This is the way I see things should be organized. Thank you for all who contributed, and thank you for those who just kept quiet following. I believe the way you came today in this room, it is not the way you are living. You are now becoming, or you have become, ambassadors of GBV fight. Always will be together, and after 3 months again, Dr. Nandera, please organize the same forum so that people can come. We should be able to tell them what quick wins have we been able to address, even if it is just at the level of documentation or writing of programs, but let the people keep informed. Don't tell me that we don't have funding to invite them. You just do Zoom. Because even today, people from globally are watching this event. Only through systematic follow-up, monitoring and evaluation, trying to move as a team, inspiring each one, will be able to make all those difficulties experienced by my friend Fatuma Karume possible. With these few remarks, thank you very much. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister, for that, for those closing remarks, and for joining us today. We do appreciate your time. Right, without further ado, I would now like to welcome Dr. Mara Warwick to do, I hope, what I would like to consider a summary of the comments from today from both the two panels, but also our key takeaways from all the discussions. Karibu sana, Dr. Mara.
Thank you very much. And I think very, very challenging to sum up such a rich discussion as we have had today. And also to follow such a speech of commitment from the Honourable Minister in terms of the government's follow-up. But let me just make a few comments. So I think we know that the issues, the challenges of gender equality, and particularly the challenge of violence against women and children, these are challenging issues in every country and in any country. I think what impresses me most about this morning is that Tanzanians from many, many different walks of life have come together in an open discussion, and we have had an open discussion to talk about these issues. And not only that, in the room, this discussion is live streamed to the world, to the internet. That in itself, I think, is impressive, and I congratulate Tanzania for that. There are many countries in the world in which this would not have been possible. So, but that's not to say that this is the solution, but this is most definitely an important step, and we are delighted to be able to support that. I think what we heard is that bold moves are needed and bold moves are wanted in this country. And I heard a lot of passion in the room from all stakeholders to really take this agenda forward for Tanzania. I appreciate very much, as we all do, the partnership and the commitment of Honourable Minister Gwajima, who, as she herself said, and I was going to mention it, has been here since the beginning, since the early morning, and with her team, team, with key members of her team, to listen and to hear and to engage with all of us. And that's a really important commitment. It's an important signal also, of course, of Her Excellency President Samia Suluhu Hassan's commitment to this agenda. And I think it gives us all a great deal of confidence as we move forward. But I also want to really note that we have had some very important stakeholders from civil society, from advocacy, who've also been here in the room with us today, putting forward their ideas. Fatma, Rebecca, Cecilia, Lucy, Godfrey, and of course Carol, who took on the biggest job of all to try to make this session work. Thank you to all of you for coming and using this platform also to bring your deep knowledge of these issues, your passion and your concern to this discussion. It's really, we need to have discussions of this type, of this depth, with this level of knowledge, both on the side of the government as well as stakeholders, so that we can move forward in Tanzania on these issues. I think we all agree on the facts. I didn't hear anybody dispute any of the facts here. And I think that that is an important, important outcome also that we feel of this report. One of our objectives was to get it down on paper and to create a platform in which we could begin these discussions. And we could also help to promote this kind of discussion. But I'm also extremely grateful to hear both from our stakeholders in the room as well as from our government the intention to use these reports, to take this discussion forward. I think we don't want to write reports that go on somebody's shelf. So the fact that these reports are being actively recognized as a tool to take us forward is really very important. Just a couple of things, I don't want to spend long, but just a couple of things on the substance. So we heard about the importance of community and social norms. We heard that it's difficult to change it, but it's important to change. And there's going to need to be necessary work done at the community level to help to change these social norms and these community attitudes. We heard about the importance of the legal and policy framework. And we heard that these need to be appropriate for the issues and that they need to be strengthened, but they need to be enforced. And so really looking at that whole element of policy and legal framework. And again, I come back to one that we have come back to many, many times today, which is the Marriage Act, and making sure that this step is taken expeditiously. We also heard that it's important to focus on young women. Young women are vulnerable. So focusing on keeping girls safe in schools, on educating them on reproductive health to promote their agency. All of these aspects are really important and really speak to the long-term nature of this issue, that we take the youth of today and we help them to be the long-term ambassadors of this agenda. We heard about the important role of men and the important role to support women. Women know these issues. Women have agency. Women are empowered, as we've heard in our previous discussion, but they need the support of men in Tanzania to be able to take these issues forward so that they truly can have gender equality. We also heard about the importance of sustainable funding, and here I will call out the government and ask the Ministry of Finance also to think about now with our new Ministry of Gender, how to properly finance and make sure there is sustainable financing. I'm sure there will be development partners, including ourselves, willing to support. But ultimately, this will be much more powerful if it becomes an integral and sustainable part of the government's own budgeting. And I think the last thing that I wanted to comment on was something that Honourable Minister said to me as we were sitting at the table, and that is that this discussion is important, but this discussion needs to happen in Swahili as well. And I think this is also very important. We have discussed today in English because for many of us, this is the way to be able to engage. But the more important discussion is the discussion that will happen with communities, with the people of Tanzania. It will happen in Swahili. And I think we need to also think, all of us in the room here, think about ways that we can also help to promote that discussion, to take it down to the community level in a way that is effective. And that does also mean language. My final word, the World Bank is here to support. You are here to lead, we are here to support. This is a high priority for us and you can count on it. Thank you very much.
Very much for that, Dr. Mara. And it's a good affirmation of the support from the World Bank. So we're looking forward to that meeting after 3 months, to be called upon. We're looking forward to the committees and the task force, and hopefully these ones won't just be committees and task force, quote unquote. We would actually see more, an interministerial technical committee. Wow, I like that Bonaventure. Right, so I am reminded to inform you that the hard copies of the report are outside. You can grab yours as you walk out. And for those who are interested in lunch, please grab your coupon from our team. They will be outside as well, handing those over. But apart from that, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for being present. Again, we apologize for running over time. As a moderator, so many times I wanted to cut off the panelists, but I'm like, okay, no, this is very important. We got to let them speak. So again, we apologize for that. But other than that, asante sana and karibuni to lunch. Mwenzangu,